Chapter 41. Undercurrents Surging. The next morning, the Kanto Alliance meeting room hummed with tension. 2 blocks of delegates filled the long conference table, voices rising into a steady, angry roar. At the head of the room, Chairman Damalanki sat back in his chair, calm and composed, nursing a cup of tea as he watched the scene unfold. After several minutes of escalating noise, the chairman cleared his throat twice, but the bickering continued as if he hadn't spoken. Damalanki glanced towards Sakaki and Kaneda, seated at his side. Jintian, who was nearby, caught his meaning instantly and slammed a fist down on the table. "Quiet!" he barked. The command cut through the room. A few continued to mumble, but most of the delegates fell silent at Sakaki's cold stare or were dragged into quiet by their companions. The 2 camps had already split into factions, one led by Sakaki and the other by Kaneda. By head count, Sakaki's group held the advantage. Once the room had settled, Damalanki took an unhurried sip of tea and set the cup down. "If you keep arguing like this," he said dryly, "you're not going to come up with anything useful. Stop wasting time. Just come up with a rule." "President, here's the report we prepared." Jintian took a folder from his subordinate and presented it with a bow. Damalanki accepted it, skimmed the pages, and gave a small nod. He set the folder on the table, then looked up at Sakaki. "President, this is my report." Sakaki handed his own document forward in a manner neither obsequious nor arrogant. Dama took it, read carefully, frowned for a moment, then nodded again. "Both reports are excellent. I'll study them in detail and convene a video conference with the presidents of the regional alliances. That's all for today. Remember, pointless quarrels are a waste of time. We need to placate the local residents as soon as possible and maintain social stability." "Yes, President," Jintian replied quickly. "Sakaki, stay here. The rest of you are dismissed." Dama picked up his teacup and took a measured sip. Jintian led his team out of the meeting room. They stepped into the corridor and dispersed. "You said the president left Sakaki behind," a middle-aged man began, but Jintian's hard look cut him off, and the words died on his lips. He glanced around the empty room, then steered the man into a shadowed corner. "Don't worry about Sakaki," Jintian said in a low voice. "I've got a sure thing. I'll win the next chairman election." Jintian moved to the window and lit a cigarette with calm precision. The other man ordered one too, drew a slow drag, hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you, boss. Still, Sakaki's not someone to underestimate." "I know that," Jintian replied. "I know more than you think, but I can't explain now. It's not a matter of trust. You've been with me for years. Just remember this. I hold something that will damn him for good." He took another puff. A cold glint passed through his eyes. Sakaki had risen from nothing, joined the alliance, and in a short time carved out a foothold among the upper ranks. If Jintian hadn't stumbled onto his deepest secret, Sakaki would never have been a match for him. "All right, let's get to work, those damn poaching gangs." Jintian stubbed out his cigarette and hurried back into the office with the middle-aged man to start the day's work. In the conference room, Damalanki looked up. "Sakaki, what do you make of this poaching gang incident?" Sakaki folded his hands and answered carefully. "President, I think they must have an insider in the alliance. Otherwise, there's no way they could predict the timing and movements of our operations so precisely." Damalanki nodded slowly. "Your report is thoughtful, but it's a bit extreme. Still, there's merit to it. The alliance has enjoyed peace for too long. Some people have forgotten the sacrifices it took to build this cooperation. Your suggestion could be used in due course, just not right now." "Understood, President," Sakaki said respectfully. Damalanki smiled. "Sit, Sakaki. Let's talk." Sakaki took a seat on the sofa, and Damalanki perched opposite him. With a teasing tone, he added, "So, Sakaki, are you angling for the president's chair?" Sakaki laughed. "Haha, President, of course I am." "This is a crucial step in my plan," Sakaki admitted plainly. Damalanki laughed and wagged a finger at him. "You brat, so blunt." His smile faded, and his tone turned serious. "Listen, Sakaki, in this world things are either black or white. There is no gray. If you want the alliance presidency, you must be white. Do you understand?" Sakaki fell silent, meeting Damalanki's gaze. "As long as you choose white, I'll push you for the presidency," Damalanki went on. "I admire you. You're a rare new blood in the alliance after all these years. With your talent and skill, you can pull us out of this stalemate, break the monopoly and the blockade, and find a way for everyone to benefit." Sakaki looked slightly moved, but said nothing, studying him. "I've watched you grow, step by step, into the person you are," Damalanki continued, softer now. "I trust your judgment. Go home and think it over. Tell me when you've decided." He lifted his teacup and took a quiet sip. Sakaki bowed respectfully to President Damaranki and turned to leave the meeting room. Damaranki watched his back go and let out a silent sigh. He wanted, more than anything, for Sakaki to come back. If a young man as capable as Sakaki could sit in the Alliance presidency and sever ties with the old ways, he believed the Alliance could finally move into a better era. The Alliance had grown bloated, splintered by factions, while the great families gained ever more influence. Fresh talent was thinning out. Damaranki longed for change but felt powerless to bring it about. When the Alliance was founded, those families had poured in effort. Without them, it might never have existed. Now, however, they had become the biggest obstacle to progress. The thought gave Damaranki a heavy sigh and a pounding headache. At present, only Oki's faction was pushing hard for reform, trying to break the family's monopoly. Their initiatives were at least a promising start. Even though the approvals for issuing them are strict right now, once the follow-up procedures are in place, we can distribute them on a large scale. Don't worry about Joey and Junsha. There's a ferry arranged through the Yulong family. As for the others, let them wait. There's no rush. Damelin's fine, pale hair was beginning to thin. Whenever he walked toward his office and passed President Damalanki in the corridor, he always stopped to bow politely. Damalanki would smile and nod in return. Tokiwa Jim. "Boss Sakaki, our inside man says Kaneda's uncovered something that could be very bad for you," Manatori said, pushing his glasses up his nose. Sakaki was seated on the sofa, a cat curled in his lap. He stroked it idly as he answered, "Send someone to handle it. Wipe it clean." He closed his eyes and let Damarachi's words play through his mind. Manatori acknowledged the order and slipped out without a sound. It's not easy to leave the past behind, Sakaki thought. The room fell into a hush. When he opened his eyes, he stared at the photograph on the coffee table. In it was a handsome boy, but his expression was grave, almost severe. Chapter 42. Thunder. Late at night, a team slipped quietly up to a villa. One of them hissed an order, "Arados, hypnotic powder." A pale cloud drifted from Arados and silently filled the rooms. After a few minutes, they confirmed there was no movement inside. They signaled to each other and slipped across the threshold, careful to step around sleeping Pokémon and avoid the patrols. Wearing gloves, they split up and began an efficient, methodical search of every room. Suddenly, the light snapped on. "Everyone, please forgive the hour," a voice called. Alliance law enforcement officers flooded into the house. On the second floor, Jintian pulled off his gas mask and smiled down at them. "I'm sorry for the poor hospitality at this late hour." The infiltrators' leader snarled an order. "Retreat! No, 4 and number 5, cover the rear." They began to fall back toward the exits. As they retreated, desperate commands were barked to their Pokémon. Double bomb gas, rumble rock, big self-destruction. Jintian's expression went white. Under the protection of his team, he urged everyone out of the villa, shouting for an immediate evacuation. Boom! The explosions tore through the building. In an instant, the villa was reduced to a smoldering ruin. Jintian stared at the villa with a cold expression. He signaled to a subordinate, pulled a USB drive from his pocket, and said, "Spread this. I want him destroyed." "Yes, sir." The man took the drive and immediately began contacting various media outlets. Within minutes, a storm of headlines began to form. Outside, Junsha and the firefighters moved in, cordoning off the villa, keeping order, and tending to the wounded. Chief Kaneda was prepared. The plan failed, Manatori said from behind Sakaki. The words hung in the room like a chill. Manatori felt sweat bead on his forehead. After a long silence, Sakaki finally asked, "How's the evacuation going?" "They're evacuating quickly. Middle and upper management have already left, and all the core data has been secured," Manatori reported, eyes down. "Good. Let's go out and meet our old friends." Sakaki rose and walked purposefully toward the roof. He climbed to the Tokiwa Gym rooftop. When Kaneda saw him step out, he shouted, furious and defiant, "Sakaki, you can't run! Surrender!" Below and all around, the Tokiwa gym was ringed with people. Watari, Silva, Granny Kikuko, Kona, Akane, Rika, and the top fighters from the Kanto and Johto alliances were all there. The square hummed with tension. "Humph, I'm retired, but I can't even get any peace," Granny Kikuko muttered, clearly displeased. Kaneda laughed wildly. "Ha! Sakaki, you can't run forever." "Shut up!" Kikuko snapped at him. At her sharp tone, Jintian, who had been about to speak, went rigid and fell silent. Sakaki gave a bitter smile. "What a pity. I was only one step away. I never imagined I'd be undone by a clown like you." He gave Kaneda a glance that silenced the man. Kaneda ground his teeth, but kept quiet. "Let's see how long you can keep acting so proud," Sakaki added. Watari stepped forward. "Sakaki, don't make this worse. For all you've done for the Alliance over the years, we'll be lenient." Sakaki laughed again, contemptuous. "Watari, you're far too naive. This alliance is rotten to the core. Mercy is a joke here. Stop talking nonsense and fight." With that, Sakaki threw a handful of Pokéballs. His core team materialized. Beedrill, Catboss, Nidoqueen, Tyrannosaurus, Rhydon, and Superpower. The crowd tensed as the battle-ready Pokémon took their positions. "Sakaki, Mega Evolve!" At Sakaki's command, the Beedrill swelled and changed into a colossal Mega Beedrill. A terrible pressure washed over the clearing, electric suffocating, and an all-out battle exploded around them. The Mega Beedrill struck like lightning, every movement a kill shot. No one there could match it. Only Watari seemed capable of standing against the onslaught. At the same time, Charizard answered the call and Mega evolved as well, becoming the feared Black Tyrant. It lunged Strag, HT at Mega Beedrill, and the two monsters met in a storm of claws and stingers. Sakaki was fighting off half the group by himself, darting between attacks and keeping from being overwhelmed. For a while, he actually held his own. Jintian, however, had vanished without a trace. "Ha ha, let's quit while we're ahead. This isn't over. We'll meet again," Sakaki called, grinning. He slipped past an incoming attack, vaulted into the flying craft Manabu was piloting, and lifted off. A swarm of Pokémon provided cover as they retreated. No one could pursue. Mega Beedrill had routed the main forces. Only Watari and old Granny Kikuko had any chance of giving chase. Watari clenched his fists and cried, "Sakaki!" Kikuko stood looking toward the direction Sakaki had gone. She said nothing, shook her head once, and turned away. That night the Alliance issued a warning to the press. Any reporting about Sakaki was strictly forbidden. Orders came down from the top. Find Sakaki, dead or alive. In the president's office, Dama Lanki sat staring at the vice president's badge on the desk. He did not move for a long time. "Sakaki," he said under his breath, "I didn't expect you would go this far." He slid the badge back into its case, then crossed to the window. The city lights blurred under a sleepless sky. He couldn't bring himself to sleep. By morning, the Alliance released an official notice. Sakaki, former leader of the Tokiwa Gym, had resigned. Kikuko, once counted among the 4 Heavenly Kings, would temporarily assume the gym leader's duties. The Alliance's senior leadership mounted an exhaustive search through Kanto and Johto, but Sakaki appeared to have disappeared without a trace. No sightings, no leads. For most people in the Alliance, the episode barely registered. They were only a little surprised that the master of Tokiwa Gym had been replaced by the long-retired King Kikuko. Behind the scenes, however, the Alliance worked hard to suppress any further fallout and smooth over the consequences of Sakaki's sudden vanishing. The Alliance election results were on the screen. Damalanji had been re-elected president, while Vice President Jintian was suspended for dereliction of duty. Farmer Du sat in the living room watching the news, his mood sour. Dagayu looked bewildered. He had woken up to find the Alliance in turmoil. What had happened overnight? Had Sakaki defected? Du stared at the TV in silence. Dagayu didn't even know what question to ask. "What does any of this have to do with a simple farmer like me?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Still, he was worried, and he pressed for details. The others assured him that, as far as they knew, things were under control. Du then briefly recounted what had happened the previous night. As he listened, Daguyu went pale. It turned out Sakaki hadn't fled by choice. He'd been forced into it. Clearing his name would not be easy. Only the Alliance president could realistically help him, and that avenue had been cut off when the president was undermined by a troublemaker. Daguyu asked, half to himself, whether Sakaki's becoming president would have been a blessing or a curse. Du sat there for a long moment, thinking. Yesterday's events had hit him hard. He hadn't expected so many people to turn on Sakaki, and he hadn't expected Sakaki to be unable to withstand them. When he finally stood up to leave, his shoulders were heavy with worry. Does he always have to brag that he's the only one fit to be Sakaki? Daguyu complained to himself. It felt like the alliance was already crawling with Sakaki, Majishi, Nancy, and Aju. Aju? He came to my place yesterday? The thought made Daguyu break out in a cold sweat. Had Sakaki already noticed him? Thinking back over recent events, he slapped his forehead. It would be strange for the champion to visit your house every day and for you not to notice. Sakaki was such a formidable person. He shouldn't be paying attention to him. Daguyu silently prayed that he hadn't been noticed. Chapter 43. Return to Peace. What had happened yesterday didn't bother Du. Those were matters for the higher-ups to worry about. He got up in the morning, washed, and set about his day as usual. After stretching and opening the door, he moved through his small routine, a quick wash, then a slow breakfast brought by the housekeeper. He settled on the sofa and let his thoughts drift back to the conversation with the president. Du, it's not that you're not capable, the president had said. It's that I can't choose you. Is it because of the Yulong family? Du had asked. Yes. All right, I understand. Even though Du had kept his face impassive during the talk, the words had left a small sting. He could see why the president refused him. If he had been in the president's position, he might have done the same. And he understood why Sakaki was chosen. In the circumstances, it had been the only sensible option. Re-electing someone else would have been a desperate, ineffective move. Du sat on the sofa like that for the whole morning, thinking things over. Outside, the day went on, but for him the moment felt quiet and settled, a temporary return to peace. Daguyu came back from work, washed up in the bathroom, then sat down across from Du and poured himself a glass of juice. What's wrong? You've seemed so down the last few days. Have you managed the thing with the alliance yet? He asked. Du sat up straighter and turned serious. Otani, what do you think of the league right now? Daguyu blinked. The question caught him off guard. I think it's doing all right, he said. Du's face tightened. All right? He shook his head. Never mind. Asking someone like you is pointless. He leaned back, voice low. You know there are kids all over the league who can't even get the most basic Pokémon. All they can do is become bug catchers and cling to that as their only shot at a dream. Daguyu considered him for a moment. Du, I know what you're getting at, but I'm telling you, future generations will deal with future problems. All we can do is handle what lies in front of us now. Don't shoulder more than you have to. He stood, drained his glass, and went to make lunch. When he came back out of the kitchen, Du was gone. Daguyu had learned to expect it. Du had been worrying like this a lot lately and slipping away to think. Daguyu had thought about this question himself. If he were in their position, what would he do? Most of the problems he saw came down to one thing, an unfair allocation of resources. In the world of Pokémon, the most valuable assets are anything related to Pokémon, knowledge, access, and the creatures themselves. Without Du, Otani never would have gained so much practical know-how about breeders and trainers. Ordinary people rarely find a way onto the trainer's path by themselves. The Alliance's current policy of distributing the Pokémon Atlas only to the descendants of meritorious families or to households that have paid taxes for at least 10 consecutive years was a start, but it didn't go far enough. The Atlas, essentially a Pokémon dictionary, functions like more than a book. Trainers who possess one can have most of their travel expenses reimbursed and are entitled to free meals and lodging at the Poké Center. That relief makes travel and training far more attainable. In effect, the Alliance is funding promising young people. More importantly, it bypasses the gatekeeping of the major powers that otherwise control who gets access to resources and opportunity. On top of that, the Atlas's Pokémon introduction feature helps novice trainers quickly learn the attributes and habits of different species. With that combination, financial support, logistical help, and ready access to knowledge, a far wider swath of society could realistically pursue training. Professor Oak, the creator of the Pokémon Encyclopedia, has become the league's most brilliant and respected figure of modern times. He gave up the championship long ago to devote himself wholly to researching and promoting Pokémon, and his work is finally starting to bear fruit. The Ashita battlegrounds share that same goal, though they approach it in a different way. That was the point Daguyu and Du kept making. You don't have to shoulder everything alone. There are so many people in the world. Someone will always come up with a good idea. That afternoon, a challenger arrived as scheduled. Lately, the challengers have been strong across the board, although a few still fall short. Daguyu tests each one's character first, and if they pass, he offers generous support. Some accept eagerly, others insist on relying on themselves. Daguyu respects those who choose to struggle on their own and tells them the door is always open if they change their minds. Peaceful days pass quickly. Before anyone noticed, the air had grown sharp and the weather had turned cold. The plants on the farm still looked healthy, thanks to Bulbasaur's green grass. But when the first snowflake drifted down, it was clear winter had arrived. Daguyu sat in her pajamas, warming herself by the hearth. She hadn't paid attention a few days ago and had come down with a cold, dizzy, congested, and with a runny nose. She sipped hot water carefully and watched the snow fall outside. Without realizing it, a year had gone by. Bulbasaur lay in the yard while the other Pokémon tumbled and laughed in the snow, having snowball fights. Daguyu told herself she would begin preparing New Year's supplies once she felt better. At lunchtime, she had no appetite. She ate a little and went back to bed. The housekeeper watched her with concern. Daguyu patted her forehead and tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, it's just a cold. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep." She closed her eyes and drifted off. The housekeeper left the room quietly. By evening, Daguyu still hadn't woken. The Guan siblings grew anxious and went in to check on her. When they shook her, they found she was burning up. They hurried off to fetch an ice pack. Brother Guanxi went to find Bulbasaur and told her what had happened. When the other Pokémon heard that Daguyu was sick, they were all worried. Round Landshark trotted to Daguyu's room, flopped down beside the bed, and began to cry. Huabebe lay across Daguyu's forehead, trembling with worry. Bulbasaur kept calm. She asked the butler siblings to help Daguyu into warm clothes and wrap her in a blanket. Then Bulbasaur gently coiled a vine whip around Daguyu and focused, channeling natural energy into his body. She told Butterfree to watch the house, and the rest hurried into town. Bulbasaur placed Daguyu carefully among the flowers on her back and protected him with her vine whip as they traveled. They arrived soon at the town's Pokémon Center. Nurse Joy sprang forward and took Daguyu inside. After a quick examination, she confirmed it was nothing serious, gave him a fever-reducing injection, and asked Happiny to use Heal Pulse. Not long after, Daguyu opened his eyes. He found himself in a hospital bed with worried faces gathered around him. Huabebe and Round Landshark were crying and clung to his arms. Daguyu forced a small smile and said, "It's okay. Really, I'm all right. Sorry for making you worry." Miss Joy and Happiny stayed just outside the ward, watching the peaceful scene through the glass. They looked so moved that Daguyu, seeing them there, decided not to be disturbed. Sleep rolled over him like a warm blanket. His eyelids drooped, and he soon sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. Two little ones, Huabebe and the Round Landshark, had already curled up in his arms and gone quiet. The rest of his Pokémon remained close by, laying down and closing their eyes as if to keep watch while he slept. At dawn, Miss Joy slipped back in and gently took his temperature. "Mr. Otani has a really strong bond with your Pokémon," she said with a smile. "They're all very attached to you." Daguyu gave a tired laugh. "Of course. They're my family. Your fever's gone down," Miss Joy reported. "You should be well enough to be discharged this morning." "Thank you so much, Miss Joy," Daguyu murmured. "It's our job. Get some rest before you go," she replied, then left with Happiny trailing at her heels. When the door closed, Daguyu reached out and brushed a sleeping Round Landshark's flank, then checked on Huabebe. He turned his head toward Venusaur. Their eyes met. No words were needed. They understood each other perfectly. "Thank you, Venusaur," he said softly. "Nada," Venusaur replied, a low, content rumble. It extended a vine and gently wrapped it around Daguyu's hand, a quiet promise that it would keep watching over him. I can do that, but I don't yet have the chapter text to rewrite. Please paste the chapter or attach it, and I'll produce a polished, idiomatic English version that preserves all characters, plot points, and details. While you paste, here are a few polished alternatives for the single line you provided, in different tones. Pick a tone if you'd like me to match it. Warm and simple. Yes, we're partners and we'll be family forever. Formal, solemn. Yes, we are partners and we will remain family forever. Intimate, soft. Yes, we belong to each other. Partners, family forever. Resolute, determined. Yes, partners, family forever. Tell me also, any preferred point of view or tense to keep? US or UK spelling? Any phrases, names, or lines you especially want preserved verbatim? Paste the chapter when ready, and I'll start the rewrite. Chapter 44. Recovering from a minor illness. Back at the farm, Dagayu's sister, ever eager to run the household, strictly forbade him from working until he was completely recovered. He had to stay in bed for 2 more days. On the 3rd day, the doctor finally allowed him to get up and move around, but he still wasn't permitted to go back to work. During his convalescence, his brother, who liked to oversee the servants, took over all the tasks on the farm. The only things left for Dagayu to handle later were the blocks of perfect quality, the delicate, top-grade pieces that needed his touch. Used to working every day, Dagayu found it impossible to sit still. He paced the room, restless and aching all over. Bored out of his mind, he eventually went into the living room, sank onto the sofa, and turned on the TV. A Digimon episode was playing, and he watched it with more interest than he expected. When the noise reached him, Round Land Shark padded over to join him. Huabebe curled up on top of Round Land Shark's head and watched too. Around noon, Du, whom Dagayu hadn't seen in ages, strolled onto the farm, flopped down on the sofa, and lay there like a salted fish. Du, I haven't seen you in so long. Where have you been? Dagayu asked. I went to Sinnoh, Du said, stretching. I just got back a few days ago. I heard you were sick, so I came to see you. Du stood, went into the kitchen for a glass of juice, then sank back onto the couch and sipped it slowly. Any news about Sakaki? Dagayu asked, curious. Du shook his head. No. There were reports he showed up in Sinnoh for a while, but when we checked with the Sinnoh Alliance, he was gone. It's annoying. Team Rocket's been unusually active lately, like they're searching for something. Searching for something. Dagayu tried to sift through the memories of his previous life for a clue, but found nothing and let it drop. He stretched out on the sofa like a lump of salted fish and turned on the TV. After an hour of idle channel hopping, he grew restless and decided to get some air. He asked Du if he wanted to come. Du waved him off. Yuan Lucia and Huabebe were glued to the screen, so Dagayu left alone. The training field was busy. Every Pokémon was going through its daily routine. Bulbasaur and Raiden had completed the training regimens Dagayu had laid out for them, and the results were impressive. By this point, every Pokémon was beginning to find its own fighting style and direction. Dagayu couldn't do much for them. His team would have to build up their battle skills one fight at a time, and with the snow these past few days, no one had come to challenge him. After walking the fields for a while, he felt the cold creeping in and went back inside. At noon, after lunch, the maid brought his medicine. She waited until she saw him take it and then left, clearly relieved. Dagayu flopped onto the sofa and started chatting idly with Du. Du talked about the customs and culture of Sinnoh in a steady stream, and the stories woke a small restlessness in him, a longing to go somewhere beyond the farm. Don't you get bored staying here all day? Du asked suddenly. Dagayu scratched his chin. It wasn't such a bad idea. He'd already arranged most things in advance. Since he had nothing pressing to do, he'd even prepared about 6 months' worth of supplies. If he was gone for a few days, Grandpa Fumin could watch the place. That would work. By afternoon, Dagayu gave himself one concrete task: make travel plans. After sitting alone for a few minutes to think things over, he rose and told Du he had some errands to run, then set off to arrange the trip. I still haven't decided where to go for my trip during Dagayu, but one thing's certain: I want to see the sea. That will have to wait until next year, though. New Year is coming, and there isn't much point in traveling now. Another day passed. I kept reassuring the housekeeper that I was completely recovered, and only after I insisted several times did she, still a little worried, let me go back to work. I changed into my farm clothes and felt that familiar comfort settle over me. I was ready. Today's job was shoveling snow. Round Land Shark grabbed a small shovel and set to work beside me. Huabebe, who was afraid of the cold but desperate to help, insisted on coming along, so I tucked her inside my coat to keep her warm. She poked her head out happily and peered around, thrilled to be part of the team. A few other Pokémon came over to lend a hand, and together we cleared the front yard quickly enough. Next, we took on the main road, which took the whole morning. When we finished, the snow lay heaped along the roadside like a clean white wall. Something artistically inclined inside me woke up at the sight. I picked up my shovel and began to carve. With a few deft movements, I carved Bulbasaur, Raiden, and the rest of my companions out of the snow, shaping them into lively, almost breathing forms. They looked exactly as they always did, only this time frozen in white. Daguyu remembered all kinds of Pokémon as he worked. Even Round Landshark wanted to join in, but after taking forever, he produced something bizarre. Daguyu, annoyed, flattened it with his shovel. After lunch, he went back to sculpting. One by one, the snow Pokémon took shape, and before long, the whole farm was dotted with his creations. Daguyu put his hands on his hips and admired his work with a little pride. In the afternoon, Du and Daigo arrived. They wandered among the sculptures with keen interest, spotting a number of Pokémon they didn't recognize. Daigo jabbed a finger at a bulky, mosquito-like figure striking a muscle pose. "What is that? It's weird." "I don't know the name," Daguyu admitted. "I only saw it on the internet." Du moved closer for a better look. "That's from the Alola region, one of the Ultra Beasts. That muscled mosquito must be one of them." "Yeah," Daigo said. "Some of those are pretty dangerous." Nearby, Wataya was trying his hand at carving some of the stranger beasts too, but his skill level wasn't any better than Roundland Shark's. His sculptures turned out similarly awkward. Daigo and Otani burst out laughing. Otani bent over the woodblock and began to carve, following Daigo's rapid-fire descriptions. Shuwu Yide, Philome Beetle, Electric Beam Wood, Paper Royal Sword, Tihuahuia, Bad Eater, Lei Leishi, Banghead Clown, Poison Babe. The list sounded absurd and wonderful, exactly the sort of names you found in the Pokémon world. Daigo grinned as he talked. He still remembered some of the stranger creatures, a space virus Pokémon that had once tangled with Rayquaza, and the Paradox Pokémon rumored to exist in the Patia region. "If you ever had the chance to go," he said, "you should definitely try to see them." After a while outside, the three of them grew tired and went inside to brush the snow off. Daigo headed to the kitchen and made 3 steaming cups of hot cocoa. They settled onto the sofa and chatted quietly, the room warm and smelling faintly of chocolate. Later, Daigo went upstairs and came back with a sheaf of paper. He handed his most recent comic to Dawu. Dawu flipped through it, then smiled. "This is pretty good. A smart blend of education and entertainment, all built around travel." The comic had been based on one Daigo remembered from his previous life, but he'd rewritten everything himself. He'd changed all the tasks, reshaped the episodes to fit their world. After what had happened last time, Daigo found himself thinking about what he could do with the skills and knowledge he had, what he could manage within his own abilities. After thinking it over, the creator said, "This one seems the most suitable, and it's the easiest for kids to absorb. By following the protagonist through a string of adventures, children will pick up knowledge almost without realizing it. That said, most of the later episodes haven't been drawn yet, so you'll have to wait a while." "That's fine," Daigo replied. "By the way, does the comic have a name?" "Just call it Pokémon," Daigo nodded. "Makes sense. It's a children's series, so that's a catch." Chapter 45. Now that we're here, let's do something. These days are especially busy for Daguyu. Alongside preparing New Year's goods, he's racing to finish his manuscripts. In the studio, he exhales slowly, sets down his paintbrush, carefully packs away the last comic draft, and plans to send it to Daigo later. There isn't much to do on the farm in winter. Caterpillars have gone into hiding to overwinter, and Butterfree only show up now and then. Daguyu sits at his desk and thinks. He's still a little shaken by his conversation with Du yesterday. Ever since he arrived in this world, he's wanted to leave some kind of mark, but what can he actually do? Become a top trainer, a champion breeder? An individual can only accomplish so much. Du and Sirona are both champions. Even as the region's strongest trainers, their room for change is limited. The real obstacle is competing interests. Too many forces are involved. Why would anyone give up power just because you hold a title? If you can't take the old pieces of the pie, make a new pie. There are very few formal competitions in the league. There are only two kinds of official competitions right now, Daguyu said. Regional conferences where trainers face off, and the Hoenn League's coordination contests for coordinated trainers. If we added more events on that basis, the pool of rewards could be spread wider. But you can't just carve the regions up among yourselves. That would only raise the chances of civilian trainers rebelling. The idea is sound, but how to put it into practice is your problem. Pack up and take it downstairs. Downstairs, Watari was bent over a go board with his younger brother, the household steward. Daguyu explained the proposal to Du and watched him study the position. Du picked up a stone, rolled it between his fingers, and let out a slow breath. It would help diffuse some of the tension, he said at last, but only for a while. Staging new events will keep people busy for a time, Du went on, but how long before everything becomes saturated? We don't know. I'll have to discuss it with the president, he concluded. With that, he rose and hurried off. Daguyu's gaze drifted back to the board. At the central intersection, two dark stones sat like twin dragons, blocking the way. He smiled and ruffled the steward's hair. All right, he said softly. Come play with me next time. Then the match began in earnest. Each trainer and each Pokémon moved across the board like pieces in a fierce chess game. Alliance President's office. Damalanki listened quietly as Du finished his report. Du, the idea is sound, he said, but the specifics will have to go to an internal vote. Personally, I think we should start with private competitions. That will make it harder for outside forces to interfere. If the Alliance puts its full weight behind this from the start, we won't get the effect we want. All right, Du replied. Let's run a few small contests at Otani's farm and see how they go. Otani can front the prizes at first. If needed, I can reimburse him. Back at Otani's farm, Daguyu sneezed, then launched into a bickering match with his brother, who also doubled as the housekeeper. The fight was close, but Daguyu eked out the win. His brother Guanxi lost by a hair. Just then, Daguyu's phone buzzed. A single-word message appeared on the screen. Jam. Daguyu stared at it, speechless. After all the effort everyone had put in, he still had to do it himself. Fine. If no one else could be relied on, he'd take charge. There had been so many great competitions in the past, maybe he could borrow the best ideas and adapt one. He thought about it in silence. Over the next few days, Daguyu couldn't stop thinking about it. After several days of hard work, he finally sketched out a plan. He called it the Trials of Olympus. 4 events in all: wind, fire, mountain, and forest. Wind would be the Pokémon world's version of track and field, an obstacle course race. Competitors would be scored by their course time and their rate of perfect completions on the obstacles. Fire would be a battle event using the standard formats, 1v1 and 3v3. Rankings and points would be determined by wins and losses. Mountain would be a triathlon-style contest. Depending on each Pokemon's species, different weights would be added. Competitors would have to complete a prescribed long run, a swim, and a bike segment, and final times would be used to rank and assign points. Forest would be a wild survival challenge. Items would be hidden around the area, and trainers would have to collect as many as they could, return them to the arena, and hand them to the referee. The more items you recovered, the higher your score. He still had to work out the detailed rules and the reward and penalty systems for each event, but the overall structure was clear. One thing he decided right away: every trainer who entered the trials would receive a handsome participation prize. Each small contest would crown a champion, a runner-up, and a third place, each position carrying different bonuses and prizes. The top 10 in total points would receive rewards, and the top 3 would get the best of them. Daguyu set his pen down and rubbed his temple. Even with his system, organizing something this complicated couldn't be done quickly. He had been turning it over in his head for days, and the constant planning left him a little dizzy. If the competition could actually be pulled off, it would be wonderful, but there were still a lot of details to work out. Could a Pokémon football league really be feasible? Should the use of certain moves be restricted during matches? Those questions kept nagging at him. For now, he decided to put those worries aside. Chinese New Year was approaching, and nothing could be more important than the holiday. He went downstairs to find a flurry of activity. A bunch of Pokémon were already busy decorating the house, hanging lanterns and streamers. The place was alive with festive color and energy. Daguyu rolled up his sleeves and joined in. Days slipped by in that easy rhythm. Between preparations and celebrations, Du would often sit down with Daguyu to hash out the finer points of the Olympus trial, refining rules and debating possible formats whenever they had a spare moment. At last, the initial set of rules was finished. How they would be implemented still needed more discussion, but that could wait until after the new year. These things couldn't be nailed down in a day or two. For now, the group had helped Daguyu secure the rights to host the event. He would be responsible for arranging the venue and props himself, and planned to sort out the specifics after the celebrations. On New Year's Eve, Daguyu took out the gifts he had prepared earlier. A red scarf for each Pokémon, tailored to their shape, each with a little cartoon likeness embroidered on a corner. In the festive spirit, Daiko led a group of Pokémon out into the yard and began setting off fireworks. The Butterfree and the others joined the celebration. Daguyu and all the Pokémon on the farm gathered around a bonfire, singing, dancing, and watching the sky light up. After midnight, the Butterfree drifted off to wherever they went, and Daguyu carried the two little ones, already asleep, back to the house. He laid them carefully on the bed before heading off to close the night. The stars that night were unusually bright, but Daguyu had no desire to sleep. It had been a year since he arrived in this world, and the thought filled him with a warm, quiet happiness. When he first came, he had only a Bulbasaur by his side. Now he had so many friends. He smiled up at the sky and whispered, "I hope you'll all be healthy and happy in the coming year." Chapter 46. New Year's Greetings. On the first morning of the Lunar New Year, Daguyu put on his new clothes and bristled with energy. He packed a few things and set off to wish Grandpa Fumin a happy new year. Over the past year, Grandpa Fumin had helped him a great deal, and Daguyu wanted to show his gratitude. Riding Kentaro, he was at Grandpa Fumin's ranch before long. It was bitterly cold, so the large dairy cows were kept inside the barn. The yard felt a little empty. Grandpa Fumin stood waiting at the door. Daguyu had told him the day before that he would come. "Happy New Year, Grandpa Fumin," Daguyu called. "Happy New Year, Xiaoyu," Grandpa Fumin replied warmly. "Come in and sit down." Grandpa Fumin ushered him into the house with enthusiastic hospitality. His son worked as a forest ranger and rarely had time off. In fact, the New Year is the busiest season for him. His daughter-in-law had come along to celebrate, and after they rested a while, they planned to come by together to visit the two elders. "Hey, Xiaoyu, try one of the cookies Grandma just baked." Daguyu picked one up and popped it into his mouth. They're delicious, Grandma Shizi." "Haha, if you like them, have another. Stay for lunch." "Okay, Grandma Shizi, thank you. I'll stay." Grandma Shizi bustled off to make a cup of tea, and soon she and Daguyu were sitting together, chatting. The old are often lonely. Even when it isn't Lunar New Year, Daguyu came by regularly, partly to check on them, partly to keep them company. Grandpa Fumin soon invited Daguyu to a game of chess. They played international chess, and despite Daguyu not practicing much these days, their matches were lively. They won a few and lost a few, but on the whole, Daguyu lost more often, not because Grandpa went easy on him, but simply because he was the stronger player. When Grandpa Fumin was young, he had been a gold medalist in the Johto region. After inheriting the family farm, he had less time to compete, and his skills had grown a little rusty, but he was still formidable at the board. A while back, when Daguyu had gone to visit Grandpa Fumin, the old man had insisted he learn chess so they'd have someone to play with later. "Both of you, come and eat," Grandma Shizi called from the kitchen with a smile. "Old man, come help me serve the food." "Let me do it," Daguyu said, jumping up to help. "Our Xiaoyu is so sensible," Grandma Shizi said fondly as they carried the dishes out together. At the table, Daguyu praised every dish as he ate, making Grandma Shizi laugh. Grandpa Fumin joined in with a quiet smile, and the mood grew warm and easy. The grandfather and grandson exchanged a look that said more than words. They talked while they ate, about the changes on Daguyu's farm, about how the city was different now, and eventually the conversation turned to his love life. "By the way, Xiaoyu," Grandma Shizi asked, "do you have someone? If not, I have a few good friends whose granddaughters are all very nice. Would you like me to introduce them so you can get to know each other?" Grandma Shizi asked, suddenly much more animated. The idea of a blind date had clearly sparked her interest. "A blind date, huh? You've even traveled through time, and you have Pokémon now. Why would you need a blind date?" Xiaoyu scratched the back of his head, uncomfortable. Grandma Shizi, I don't have any plans to get married for the time being." "Hey, Xiaoyu," Grandma Shizi scolded, worry threading her voice. "You're not getting any younger, and you're the only one in the family. You should find someone to keep you company." "I've got Bulbasaur and the others to keep me company," Xiaoyu said. Grandma Shizi waved a dismissive hand. "Pokémon are wonderful." "Ahem, Shizi," Grandpa Fumin interrupted with a cough, stepping in before things could get awkward. He gave her a mild scolding and a rueful smile. Grandma Shizi rolled her eyes, then realized she'd overstepped. "Oh, I'm too talkative," she admitted, softening. "Xiaoyu, don't take it to heart. People tend to talk too much when they get old," Grandma Shizi said with a chuckle. "Grandma, how could I blame you?" Daguyu stood and sat down beside her, sliding an arm around her shoulders. "I'm grateful you worry about me." Grandma Shizi's smile was so wide her eyebrows disappeared. "You're such a good child, always trying to cheer me up. Eat. Have some more." After that, she never brought up the blind date again, and Daguyu quietly exhaled in relief. They chatted on through the afternoon. At one point, Carter came by. He sat with them, and the conversation turned to his daughter, which put him in a gloomy mood. She'd been running wild since she left for the city and hadn't even come home for the new year. She'd at least phoned, or Carter swore he'd have come and dragged her back himself. Daguyu knew how hopelessly doting Carter was. No surprise his daughter wouldn't want to return. She'd had little choice in the past, but now she'd left the army and was no longer under military orders. With the Emperor far away and nobody to boss her around, it was the perfect chance for her to carve out some peace and freedom. After chatting for a while, Carter said his goodbyes and left. He had to call his daughter. I couldn't help wondering whether the child had eaten while they were out. Parents are really pitiable. That evening, Grandpa Fumin and Grandma Shizi were reluctant to go. They walked Daguyu to the gate. "Grandpa, Grandma, you should head back. It's cold out. I'll come see you often. Go home now," he urged. But no matter how Daguyu tried to persuade them, they wouldn't move. They watched him until he was nothing but a small figure down the road. Then, hand in hand, they went back inside and shut the door. The suburbs were especially cold at night, but the stars were unusually bright. Daguyu rode piggyback on Kentaro as they made their slow way home. No sooner had they come in than the little round land shark started up again, making a scene. Daguyu felt his temper rise, but since it was New Year's Day, he couldn't lay hands on the kid. He bit back his anger. "Make all the trouble you want," he told himself. "We'll settle this after the New Year." The chubby land shark suddenly felt a murderous glare. When he turned, Daguyu was watching him with a smile, one of those smiles that clearly meant trouble. Uncomfortable, he froze for a moment, then sheepishly sat back down and obediently watched the TV. The program on screen was Daguyu's own take on Pokémon. He'd changed the character names and tweaked their looks, close enough to the originals to be recognizable, but off in all the little ways that made it his. The opening song played in a hilariously mangled form. Pokémon, no matter fire, water, grass, or forest, in the ground, in the clouds, even under a girl's skirt, the girl squeals, "Ka! It's hard, very, very hard, but I will conquer it. Catch Pokémon. Ah, the Pokémon master I admire. I want to be one. I must be one. I will be one so you can see." No matter how many times Daguyu heard that tune, it got his blood boiling. He remembered grabbing his big yellow dog and making it perform special moves on cue. Thinking of the poor creature's aggrieved expression, he couldn't help snorting a pig-like laugh. Seeing Daguyu in a good mood, Roundland Shark leapt into his arms, and the two of them laughed together. The other Pokémon joined in, chuckling happily. Daguyu poked Roundland Shark on the head with a finger. "You!" Roundland Shark grinned cheekily. "I really can't do anything with you." Daguyu lowered his hand with a helpless smile, ruffled the little shark's head, and settled back to watch TV with the rest of them. A bit of mischief was fine. The others were all calm and steady. With this little troublemaker around, life was more fun. And if he ever went too far, they'd deal with him together. Yuan Lucia shivered and glanced at Daguyu, who was still smiling at the screen. Something about him felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it, so she set the unease aside and focused on the program. Chapter 47. Collective Evolution. After the Chinese New Year, the chubby land shark was up to mischief again, and this time Daguyu caught him red-handed. The little creature was carefully sweeping up the pieces of a broken vase behind him, trying as hard as he could to look innocent. Daguyu didn't buy it. He scooped the round land shark up, draped him across his knees, and gave him a firm smack on the rump. The land shark wriggled and whined, but he was too soft-hearted to fight back properly for fear of hurting Daguyu. He settled for silent tears and weak thrashing as his cries echoed across the farm. Butterfree in the flower field stopped to stare, curious. Huabebe hovered nearby, laughing at the spectacle. "Bebe, Bebe," Huabebe teased. "Serves you right for bullying me, hee-hee." The land shark hiccuped pitifully and blurted out between sobs, "I'll never say coo again." Daguyu kept at it until his hands went numb. Finally he relented and set the little creature down. The land shark stood there hunched over, head bowed, both tiny hands clamped over his reddened bottom. Whatever irritation Daguyu had been holding onto for days melted away. He felt oddly lighter and clearer-headed than he had in a long time. "I'll let you go today, but don't be naughty like this next time. Do you hear me?" Daguyu said sharply. The round land shark, Yuan Lucia, bobbed his head and grinned. "Okay, let's go play." Yuan Lucia darted out of the room, then paused at the door, turned back, and made a silly face at Daguyu. "Hey, you little brat!" Daguyu pretended to swat him, and the little shark squealed and bolted away. Huabebe swooped out after him, and the two of them were soon tumbling and laughing together. Daguyu rubbed his hands. They were a little swollen from the scuffle. The shark was fine, but his palms felt sore. After tidying up, Daguyu set out for his first day back on the job after the Chinese New Year. As usual, he began by inspecting the farm. Halfway through his rounds, the leader of the Butterfree came winging over in a flurry, calling out in excitement. "Foo!" Daguyu's eyes lit up. Really? He hurried to the caterpillar house. The Butterfree had come with news. All the metapods were about to evolve. Years ago, the caterpillars had become metapods, and today, finally, they were going to take the next step. This was a rare event, too good to miss. When Daguyu came running to the caterpillar house out of breath, most of the iron pupae had already begun to glow with the light of evolution. The light that filled them was bright without being blinding, warm and steady. Roundland Shark and Flower Bebe had arrived too, and other Pokémon hurried over as soon as word spread. Everyone gathered around to watch. The glow grew stronger and stronger until it burst through the walls of the little house and shot up into the sky. From some distance away, you could see the change unfolding across the farm, and more curious onlookers made their way over. Miss Junsha, who was on patrol, sprinted to Daguyu's farm as soon as she saw the spectacle. Daguyu stood in the warmth of the evolution light and felt comfortable and calm. Inside the caterpillar house, Roundland Shark and Flower Bebe danced quietly, careful not to make a sound that might disturb the process. One after another, the iron pupae completed their transformations. Butterfree started to flutter around the room and then drifted out into the open air, a delicate, newly formed sign that the evolution had finished. Colorful Butterfree fluttered in the air to an almost musical rhythm. Once the last of them finished evolving, the farm filled with their wings, dozens of Butterfree circling and dancing around a single central figure. Miss Junsha and the trainers who had rushed over after hearing the news stood speechless at the sight. The butterflies moved with uncanny coordination, wheeling around their leader as if channeling some invisible energy into him. A soft white light began to emanate from the leader's body. It brightened, and the Pokémon swelled until, before everyone's eyes, the leader became a giant Butterfree. He gave his wings a gentle, trembling beat and the light faded. Then, carefully, he flew forward and hovered in front of Dagayu, his joy plain in the way he beat his wings. Something inside Dagayu shifted. His powers felt different now, clearer, and for the first time, he understood exactly what the Pokémon were saying. Smiling, he leaned his forehead against the giant Butterfree. "Congratulations, Butterfree," he murmured. The giant Butterfree responded with a contented trill and darted playfully around him. From the corner of his eye, Dagayu saw a crowd gathered along the edge of the farm. He walked over quickly, the Butterfree staying loyally at his side. All the trainers felt the tension and instinctively took a step back. Once everyone noticed the change in mood, the stiff atmosphere loosened and a few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Miss Junsha walked up to Dagayu with a calm expression. "Mr. Otani, what just happened on your farm?" Mr. Otani hurried to apologize. "I'm really sorry, Miss Junsha. The metapods on my farm all evolved at once and made a terrible racket. I apologize for the disturbance." Dagayu, Mr. Otani, forced a wry smile. "I don't really know what's going on either. It might be some kind of unusual evolution." Miss Junsha didn't press him. They were all trained professionals, but ordinary people would still be surprised to see such a large Butterfree. "I'm sorry, Mr. Otani. I was just startled. I still have to report what I saw about this Butterfree, though. Please forgive me." "It's fine. It's part of your job," he said. "Then I'll be on my way." Miss Junsha swung onto her motorcycle and rode off. When it became clear there was nothing more to see, the onlookers drifted away in twos and threes. A broad-shouldered, red-haired boy suddenly leapt forward and shouted, "I challenge your Butterfree! Please!" He bowed, eyes burning with fighting spirit. Dagayu didn't get angry. He glanced at the Butterfree standing beside him. The Pokémon gave a happy nod. "All right," Dagayu said, "but I don't really know how strong Butterfree is right now. If anything goes wrong, I'll stop the battle immediately." He said it seriously to the red-haired boy. "Thank you, I'll be careful," the boy replied, his blood racing. "Getting to fight a Butterfree like that. I'll have no regrets, even if I die." Trainers can be hard to read sometimes, but remembering how I used to be makes me feel a little better. We moved out to the newly renovated battlefield, both sides preparing at the same time. Dagayu leaned toward Butterfree and spoke quietly. "I can't measure your strength yet, but I can feel a lot of power in you. Make sure you control it during the fight." Butterfree made a low, earnest sound and nodded. On the other side, the red-haired boy fished a Pokéball from his belt and tossed it into the air. "Come out, Pidgeot." A flash of red light and a sleek, handsome Pidgeot appeared overhead. Even so, the Butterfree across from it was enormous, far larger than Pidgeot. The bird had never faced a Butterfree of that size before, and froze for a heartbeat, then recovered, backing up and hovering warily. "You're the challenger. You attack first," Dagayu said calmly. The red-haired boy snapped to attention. "Fine. Pidgeot, lightning flash." Pidgeot dove like a bomber, picked up speed, and slammed into the Butterfree. "Butterfree, hold on," its trainer shouted. A thick, shimmering shield wrapped entirely around Butterfree. Pidgeot's strike only made the barrier ripple. It held firm. The attack failed, and Pidgeot rolled away to put distance between them. The red-haired boy stared, a little stunned. "Now, Pidgeot, Air Blade." Invisible slicing currents shot toward Butterfree, but each one was stopped by the defensive barrier. "It's our turn, Butterfree." A surge of psychic energy slammed into Pidgeot before the red-haired trainer could even shout a warning. The blow struck true, and Pidgeot went down. Instantly, incapacitated. "Too strong," ran through the minds of the watching trainers like a single stunned thought. Ayan, however, showed no discouragement. He recalled Pidgeot with a grin, his excitement barely contained as he faced Dagayu. "Sir, your Butterfree is incredible. My ace, Pidgeot, couldn't take a single hit, but I won't give up. I'll challenge you again." Dagayu laughed warmly. "No problem. What's your name?" "Ayan," the boy said, puffing out his chest. "My blood's boiling. I'm fiery." Dagayu chuckled. "All right, Ayan. I'll remember you. I'm Dagayu. You're welcome to come back anytime." A few more trainers stepped forward, eager to test themselves, but none fared any better. Butterfree dispatched each challenger in an instant. Type matchups and tricks made no difference. Watching that, the remaining trainers slowly drifted away, dissuaded from further challenges. Ayan waved cheerfully at Dagu as he set off with his companions, then sprinted toward the battle frontier with two friends, shouting and tussling as they ran. "Ah, youth," Daguyu murmured with a small, wistful smile, momentarily lost in the easy energy of the children. Once they were gone, the farm fell quiet again. Dagu turned his attention back to Butterfree and began to study the changes more carefully. From memories of his previous life, he had a theory. The reason Butterfree had grown so large was the same phenomenon associated with leaders in the Alola region. Pokémon that become regional leaders, those with a leader's aura, can swell in size and strength to the point that they almost ignore the usual limits of type matchups. What puzzled him was why Butterfree, a species not tied to Alola, would undergo that transformation. That particular phenomenon should be unique to Alola. He couldn't figure out why it applied here. In the end, he pushed the question aside. Regardless of the cause, the change wasn't a bad one. He also noticed another effect. There was some kind of link between the leader Butterfree and the other Butterfrees. Butterfree itself couldn't explain the connection and wasn't very skilled at using it yet, but the bond was there, faint and real. Dagu let them try once, but the surge of wild, disordered energy frightened him, and he quickly stopped them. The force he felt a moment ago could have turned the whole farm to ash in an instant. It was too dangerous. Could this really be the power of their collective? He warned the Butterfree seriously. If they couldn't control that energy, they must never use it on the farm or out in the open. The Butterfree all nodded, and Daguyu dismissed them to play. With those Butterfree around, he didn't worry about the farm's safety. He also had a clear sense of the leader's strength. At the very least, it was at king level, and with its best move, it wasn't far below champion level. Venusaur, watching the Butterfree, showed an unusual flicker of eagerness to fight. Daguyu noticed that fighting spirit in his eyes, smiled and said, "Let's wait until tomorrow. The Butterfree haven't fully mastered that power yet." Bulbasaur, unhurried, nodded calmly, and fell in behind Daguyu as he began inspecting the farm. In early spring, many hungry Pokémon from the surrounding woods quietly drifted in to forage, and he wanted to make sure everything was in order. Daguyu didn't chase them off. He often shared his food with the little Pokémon and told them that if any of them were willing to work for him, he could offer 3 meals and a temporary place to stay. The little ones exchanged a quiet look, nodded, and said they understood. After they finished eating, Daguyu cleared away the dishes and went back to his work. Chapter 48. Breakthrough morning had just broken when Bulbasaur was already waiting at the battle site. He sat with his eyes closed, wrapped in a halo of rich, verdant energy, the natural life force he had learned to command. Since mastering the grass field technique, he'd been experimenting with how far he could shape that energy. Now, like the domains from the fantasy novels of his previous life, he could bend the field itself to his will. Daguyu served as referee today. Bulbasaur insisted on relying on himself. He wanted a real, honest fight. He knew Raidenmon and Kentaro were strong opponents, but he also knew they were a step behind him. No matter how hard they pushed, they couldn't quite match his level. That knowledge made both challengers tense. Anxiety only muddled their focus, and soon Raidenmon and Kentaro began to falter. Daguyu noticed and stepped in. Calmly and patiently, he explained what was happening, guiding them to settle their minds and feel the subtle shifts in their own energy. He urged them to breathe, to experience the changes instead of reacting to them. With his steady coaching, they regained their composure and returned to the proper mindset. Daguyu took his place at the sideline. Both sides readied themselves, hearts beating, energies humming through the grass. At his signal, the match began. For a moment, they were locked in a stalemate. Then Bulbasaur broke the deadlock and struck first. A deadly beam of light, laced with destructive power, shot straight at Butterfree. Butterfree raised a calm defense and absorbed the blast, but the force pushed it back several yards. Bulbasaur showed no mercy. It unleashed the full power of the green grass field. The battlefield was instantly carpeted in green. Solar beams and glowing energy orbs, vine whips and razor leaves erupted from Bulbasaur, which turned into a living turret spitting out attack after attack. Butterfree didn't dare be reckless. It danced through the air with nimble evasions, firing back as it dodged, telekinetic pushes, shimmering bursts of light, insectile squalls, and slicing gusts of wind. All the while, Dugu had already slipped away and hidden at a distance. The moment the two Pokémon noticed Dugu was gone, they stopped holding back. Their full arsenals were unleashed, and the sky filled with a blur of attacks. Because Dugu wasn't short of money, his Pokémon could be taught almost any move that was available. Even so, they still relied mostly on their signature techniques. The extras were just supplements. That said, they had learned a great many different moves. Bulbasaur and its evolved form, Venusaur, weren't particularly quick, but their recovery was astonishing. Unless you could finish them in a single hit, they could heal themselves with a combination of green grass field, photosynthesis, and ultimate absorption. There was even a parasite seed-type attack in their arsenal, but Butterfree was far too agile. Bulbasaur's near-instant parasite seed kept missing. The fight had stalled into a difficult stalemate, yet Dugu stayed cool-headed. Bulbasaur had been at a disadvantage the whole time. None of Bulbasaur's attacks had connected. Butterfree seemed to sense tiny changes in its surroundings and could dodge with ease, even avoiding strikes that came from behind. Wang Yu watched for a while longer and finally understood what was happening. Butterfree kept its wings beating constantly in flight, shedding a fine film of scales with each flap. The scales formed a kind of drifting net that blurred and diverted incoming attacks, making it incredibly hard for Bulbasaur to land a clean hit. Although the field it created didn't deal direct damage, Butterfree's sensory range was deadly in its own way. Any incoming move that crossed into it would be instantly detected, allowing Butterfree to dodge with perfect timing. Then, without warning, Butterfree struck back, pouring everything into a powerful bug buzz. Earlier in the fight, it had scattered a fine dust of scales across the arena. Each individual scale resonated only faintly with the vibrating notes of bug buzz, but because the entire battlefield was blanketed with them, the tiny resonances multiplied into a deafening chorus. The single whisper-quiet tone of one scale became a terrifying roar when thousands chimed together. Even Venusaur's defenses were useless against that effect. The insect sounds flooded the whole venue, and the ground itself seemed to shudder. Dust and grit skittered across the floor. Dugu felt cold sweat break out down his spine. This was a horrifying application of a move he'd never seen in the anime. Fortunately, Butterfree pulled back in time. Venusaur staggered, but managed to steady itself and quickly recover, drawing on its grass-type vitality and photosynthesis. Dugu rushed over to examine both Pokémon. Only after a careful check, confirming that neither had been seriously hurt, did he finally breathe a sigh of relief. Venusaur stood motionless for a long moment afterward, eyes closed, as if absorbing what it had learned from the encounter. A sudden, powerful surge of aura erupted from Venusaur. Then, almost as quickly, it faded away, leaving the Pokémon calm and unremarkable in appearance. Dugu, however, smiled inwardly. He knew what that burst meant. His Bulbasaur had broken through its bottleneck. Now evolved into Venusaur, it had reached the quasi-king level, the first of his team to do so. The other Pokémon gathered around, cheering and congratulating Venusaur. Venusaur didn't hoard the knowledge. She generously shared what she'd felt and learned during the breakthrough, explaining her insights in detail. Most of the team listened with puzzled faces, but Raiden, second only to Venusaur in strength, grew thoughtful as he absorbed the explanation. Afterwards, Dugu rounded everyone up and set them to cleaning the battlefield. Landshark tried to bolt, but Dugu caught him and fixed him with a stern look. Yuanlu Shark, under that silent threat, had no choice but to stay and help, reluctant but surprisingly industrious. What started off as a bit of fun turned into a long, grueling chore. They didn't finish until evening. After dinner, Dugu settled into his study and carefully reviewed everything he'd learned from the recent skill upgrade. His trainer rank had climbed. The system had promoted him to the quasi-king level. As he went over the new knowledge, it hit him that his earlier decision to have Bulbasaur and the others drill in the tall grass had not been a coincidence. Mastering the system's energy, the precise control Bulbasaur had been practicing, was exactly what was needed to break the barrier up to the true king level. If Kintaro and the others followed Bulbasaur's approach, they should be able to advance without major trouble. He transferred the ideas in his head to paper, gently his notes, and gained several fresh insights as he wrote. When he finished and straightened his desk, Daguyu lay down and pulled the blanket he'd kicked off back over Venusaur. He fell asleep soon after. By morning, Venusaur was already sparring with Raiden and the others. Not a real fight, but a disguised way of drilling them in new moves. For a long time, he had kept Raiden and the others sheltered beneath his kingly aura, letting them train and draw insights in peace. Insights he quietly absorbed and applied to his own growth as well. After watching them work for a while and deciding everything looked fine, Daguyu went to prepare breakfast. When the food was ready, he called Bulbasaur and the rest to eat. They agreed to continue training after the meal. Once breakfast was finished, Daguyu helped clear the dishes. Earlier he had made a deal with the wild Pokémon in the nearby forest. Any who were willing to come and help on the farm would be given food and lodging, and were free to leave whenever they wanted. In the last few days, a handful of especially weak Pokémon had timidly shown up, led by the ones Daguyu had helped before. Daguyu treated their wounds, gave them something to eat, and carefully explained the kinds of work he needed done. Nothing beyond their abilities. The little ones were thrilled. They happily set to the simple chores Daguyu assigned them, doing things like cleaning and weeding with eager determination. Chapter 49. Coming before long, the Pokémon who had returned to the farm began to spread the word through their little circles. If you work at Big Rain Farm, you can get food. By the next morning, a crowd had gathered at the front door, dozens of them. Leading the group were the small ones who had gone out and come back the day before. Daguyu started when he opened the door, at first thinking something had gone wrong. He only relaxed when he saw what they wanted. He went inside, brought out a large supply of food, and began handing it out. They ate ravenously. Clearly, they had been hungry for a long time. These Pokémon were tiny. They were probably the lowest-ranked members of their groups, or perhaps they'd been abandoned. If they couldn't have survived on their own, they wouldn't have risked crossing the forest to come to the farm. Although he believed humans shouldn't interfere with the local ecology more than necessary, Daguyu couldn't just turn them away. Not long after, the plates were empty. A few were still peckish, so he gave them a little extra. When they had all finished, they looked up at Daguyu and waited, hopeful and expectant. A sudden headache came over Daguyu. There wasn't much to do on the farm right now, unless he reclaimed some of the abandoned plots. The idea made his eyes brighten. It might actually work. If the land were put back into use, the harvest could be sold, and with that income feeding the Pokémon wouldn't be a problem. Why not simply keep and feed them directly? He had reasons. Wild Pokémon weren't the same as those raised alongside people for generations. Their trust in humans was limited, and a fair exchange made them feel more secure. Worse, endless handouts would teach them to rely on others and strip them of the ability to fend for themselves. With that settled, Daguyu set about organizing the work on the fields. On the portion he had already reclaimed, 2 skinny gophers were hard at it, grubbing at the soil. Most of the workers were little ratas, bent over weeding and hauling stones with steady, diligent movements. Daguyu stayed back and didn't jump in to help. He would only correct them when they made mistakes, until they learned the tasks properly. Nearby, a unicorn beetle strained to push a heavy rock, its shell streaked with mud from the effort. If you didn't look closely, you couldn't even tell what it had been. Mud and grime had plastered over its features until it was unrecognizable. Otani didn't dwell on it. Beedrill were known for taking good care of their larvae, but accidents happened. There had to be a reason this little one was out here alone. It was almost noon, and everyone was tired. When Otani first arrived, he had reclaimed 100 acres of wasteland. Now the whole tract had been brought under cultivation. They'd called in a Gyarados that was practicing its rain dance to irrigate the fields. The little unicorn beetle clearly hated water and tried to edge away from the area where the rain would fall, but Gyarados' effort triggered almost instantaneously and the rain covered the whole farm. Under the Gyarados' control, it stayed as a steady, moderate shower. The beetle trembled and curled into itself. Wang Yu noticed and hurried over, fearing the worst. The rain washed the mud from the creature's body, and beneath the filth its true coloring began to show, golden. Otani gently wrapped it in a spare shirt to keep it warm. When Otani saw the beetle's color, he immediately suspected why it had been cast out of its group. Pokémon communities were brutal about color. Anything that looked different was treated as an outsider. To them, everyone is yellow, so why are you green? That kind of thinking made life nearly impossible for a differently colored Pokémon. Being driven away from the pack usually meant death. Without the protection of the group, it was almost impossible to survive in the forest. Bright, unusual colors made you an easy target for predators. The only time a differently colored member was spared was if it was the leader's own offspring. Otani gently tucked the small unicorn beetle inside his shirt and pulled his jacket around it, shielding the little body from view. The beetle was shaking, terrified that Otani would reject it for the same reason the others had. It hadn't eaten in days. Out in the wild, it had covered itself in mud just to hide its color. Without that disguise, its current companions probably would never have accepted it. Otani stroked the beetle's shell and said softly, "It's a beautiful color." The beetle froze for a moment, stunned. Is he talking about me? Rhinoceros beetle, your shell is so beautiful. Why hide it under mud? Otani repeated aloud, smiling. No, really. I'm not making this up. Your color is gorgeous to us, he added, and reached out to gently stroke the little beetle's head. The beetle's eyes narrowed in contentment. It was a sensation it had never felt before. Was this what being loved felt like? When Otani stepped out into the rain, Gyarados abandoned its rain dance and followed him, peering over curiously to see what he was holding. The beetle had never seen such a fearsome Pokémon up close. Despite its best efforts to stay calm, the sheer presence of Gyarados was intimidating. The beetle went limp and fainted, its tiny eyes glazing over. Otani shot an annoyed look at Gyarados, who returned an awkward, apologetic smile. A quick check showed the beetle was only a little weak, probably stunned by the shock, rather than seriously hurt. Wang Yu scooped it up and stepped aside, asking Gyarados to resume the rain dance. Early spring air was still chill, and the warm, steady drizzle felt necessary. Otani went back inside, took a quick hot bath, changed his clothes, and headed downstairs. At that moment, the unicorn beetle was sleeping soundly on the sofa, watched over by his brother Otani, who had taken on the role of his butler. His friends, who had been worried, were allowed inside by Otani and gathered around him in a little crowd. They were curious about his unusual coloring, but more than anything, they were concerned about how weak he looked. Otani explained calmly that the beetle was only exhausted and would be fine after some rest. Then he went into the kitchen and brought back a tray of food cubes to share, handing one to each of the visitors, and to the unicorn beetle as well. Still groggy, the beetle sniffed the fragrant cubes and began to eat without even realizing it. None of the others had tasted anything so delicious before. They finished their cubes in no time and immediately perked up. Not long after, the unicorn beetle woke. Seeing a ring of friends around him, he shrank back in fear and flinched. The room filled with anxious little cries. Pulada! Coolplus! Mingudagu! As Rattata, Sandmouse, and the gophers rushed closer, their faces full of worry. Unicorn beetle, one of them said gently, we're your friends. We don't care about your color. Have you ever had them leave you because of your color? Otani asked softly. At his words, the unicorn beetle took a breath, gathered its courage, and shuffled toward the nearest of its friends. It couldn't hold back the tears any longer. It collapsed into Lada's arms and began to sob. Lada, like an older sister, rocked it gently and patted its back until the shaking eased. Seeing the knot in the unicorn beetle's chest begin to loosen, Otani felt a small surge of relief. He glanced at the clock in the living room and realized it was getting late. He hurried to the kitchen to help his sister Ai Guanxi with dinner. The butler stayed behind in the living room to look after the Pokémon, dabbing at the stains on their coats and straightening fur, hair, and scales. The only thing missing from his immaculate care was a proper suit to complete the butler image. Rattata and the others found his fussing a little awkward, but none of them dared protest. When Otani came back into the room, he put a stop to the butler's overzealous tending. Rattata and the others let out a collective sigh of relief. The butler looked a touch disappointed, but Otani's orders were law to him, and he fell silent. He turned and brought out the bowls and utensils for the Pokémon, setting each piece neatly in place. By then Otani and the others had finished preparing lunch, too. They called Roundland Shark and the rest back, and the Pokémon padded over to their seats. The meal officially began. Rattata and the other small ones were a little shy at first. Otani caught the Roundland Shark's eye and gave a small signal. The shark understood immediately. Though reluctant for a moment, it hopped down from the chair and went over to reassure the Rattata and the others. With its cheerful, big brother manner, it quickly put them at ease, even sharing some of its food. The little Rattata and the others felt the kindness and soon relaxed, starting to eat properly. When Roundland Shark returned to his spot, he seemed to be waiting for some praise. Otani gave him a thumbs up, and the shark climbed up onto the chair, hands on his hips, looking proud as could be. Then Otani's expression shifted. "Enough showboating. Eat quickly," he said. At that, the Roundland Shark immediately snapped to attention, sat down obediently, and began eating. After Otani's little bout of fatherly discipline, the Roundland Shark was still mischievous but noticeably subdued. As the old saying goes, a bit of firmness goes a long way. For his first lesson, Otani used a small wooden stick, only a few spanks on the thick rear. The flesh was so dense it didn't bruise, but the sting was enough. Ever since then, whenever the Roundland Shark saw Otani pick up the stick, it would flinch and cover its backside with its hands. They ate lunch in a friendly, peaceful mood. In the afternoon, they went back to work. Otani showed them how to sow seeds, then the little ones took over. Rada and the others were very serious about it, carefully placing each seed in the soil and covering them gently. They worked all afternoon, had dinner, and Otani planned for them to sleep on the farm that night. But their leader, little sister Rada, shook her head. There were injured companions back in the forest who still needed tending. Otani thought for a moment, then handed her a packet of medicine and a neatly packed satchel, fastening it securely on her back. "Bring any wounded companions here tomorrow," he said. "I'll treat them." Little Rada nodded gratefully and dashed back into the forest with her friends. Chapter 50. Bully Circle Bear. The next morning, little Rada and her friends arrived at Otani's farm, limping and covered in injuries. They staggered up to the door, and Rada collapsed unconscious before they could knock. Otani scooped her up without hesitation and carried her inside, laying her gently on a bed while he began treating the wounds. The unicorn beside her was badly hurt too. Tears streaked down its face as it tried to explain what had happened. They'd returned late the night before and given Otani's medicine to their injured companions. Afterward, they opened the box to check its contents, and the strong scent of the cube inside drifted out. That smell caught the attention of a passing bear. The bear smashed into the small cave where they had been sheltering and tried to steal the cube. Big Sister Rada had fought with everything she had, barking orders and holding her friends back so they wouldn't rush in and get mauled. But despite her bravery, the cube was taken. Hearing this, Otani felt sick with guilt. He hadn't considered how sharp some wild Pokemon's noses could be. Ursagi were notorious for it. He hadn't expected that his oversight would lead to such disaster for these little ones. He was still finishing up treating the others when a commotion outside interrupted him. Otani stepped out to investigate and found that a Ursagi had broken onto the farm. Landshark and Ursagi were locked in combat while Bulbasaur and the others hovered nearby, ready to stop Ursagi from finishing Landshark off. Landshark's Dragon Claw slammed into Ursagi's arm hammer, and because Ursagi was so much stronger, the impact sent Landshark sprawling. He steadied himself in midair, landed on his feet, opened his jaws, and let loose a blast of dragon breath. Ursagi threw his arms up to shield himself. Actually, as soon as Ursagi had crept in and seen Venusaur and the others, he'd wanted to leave. Venusaur was huge and intimidating, not something he wanted to tangle with. The truth was he'd eaten some cubes the day before and been completely won over by their taste. He'd just come out of hibernation and was low on energy, so when he saw Rattata and the others heading off to find more cubes, he almost followed them. He hadn't planned to enter the farm, but greed got the better of him. He rushed in hoping to steal a few cubes and make a quick escape, and instead ran headlong into Landshark. By the time Venusaur and the rest showed up, they'd surrounded him. He couldn't leave, even if he wanted to. He'd been forced to stay and serve as Roundland Shark's sparring partner. Over the weeks of training, Roundland Shark had worked relentlessly. Its strength shot up by leaps and bounds. By now it could trade blows with Circle Bear. Their duel was fierce. Circle Bear took several hits and grew angrier, its eyes flashing red. It opened its blood-flecked maw and unleashed a destructive beam of energy. Roundland Shark avoided it with a nimble maneuver, burrowing into the earth to dodge the blast, then surfacing behind Circle Bear and striking him squarely in the back. Circle Bear howled, but instead of falling back, it surged forward, fueled by fury. With a vicious backhand, it sent Roundland Shark crashing to the ground. Raidenmon moved to intervene, but Otani caught his arm. "Trust him," Otani said. "He won't give up that easily." Raidenmon held back, though his posture made it clear he was ready to jump in at a moment's notice. Beside him, Venusaur tensed as well, prepared to act if needed. Torashark struggled to its feet, roaring as energy crackled over its skin. Gathering everything it had, it launched a Dragon God dive. The Circle Bear's eyes flared red as it poured out a tremendous surge of power, 100,000 horsepower in an instant, and the two attacks smashed together. For a heartbeat, they were locked in a deadlock. Then the balance tipped. The Circle Bear began to falter and was finally driven backward by Torashark's assault. It collapsed to the ground, too spent to continue. In truth, Torashark had only won by a hair. The Kleebear had just emerged from hibernation and hadn't fully recovered. If it had been at full strength, the outcome would almost certainly have been the opposite. How could a sheltered, greenhouse-raised creature possibly best the overlord of the forest under normal conditions? After the fight, the youngster tended to Torashark's wounds, still basking in the thrill of victory. Otani didn't scold him. No words right now could have dented the boy's pride, but he did make sure the lesson was clear. Wild Pokémon survive in a much harsher world. Next time they met one, they could not afford to rush in recklessly. The chubby Landshark listened carefully and nodded. Then Otani checked him over, gave his little rump a reassuring pat, and let him go off to play. Otani hesitated for a moment as he looked at the bear, but he still helped him dress his wounds. Kumamon came to slowly and blinked blearily. When his eyes cleared, he realized he was surrounded. Venusaur, Raiden, Gyarados, Kentaro, Snorlax, and Sharknado all stood around him with fierce expressions. Cold sweat poured down his face. He dropped to his knees and begged for mercy with all his might. Otani couldn't help but be a little amused. He'd intended to give Kumamon a small punishment, but the bear had surrendered so completely there was nothing left to do but teach him a lesson. So Otani delivered a stern ideological lecture that lasted half an hour. Bulbasaur and the others glanced at Calamari with sympathetic looks. They'd all been through Otani's education before. His voice was devilish in its effect. He didn't use a single crude word, but every sentence landed like a blow. Kumako stood there bewildered, unable to resist. She forced a polite, awkward smile that didn't reach her eyes, stiff and uncertain, while Otani's words settled over them like a weight. In the end, Otani decided Kumako would pay for what he'd done with a period of hard labor, and he apologized to Rattata and the others until they forgave him. He put Bulbasaur in charge of supervising the whole affair. With Bulbasaur watching, Kumako had no chance to run away. He was put to work on Otani's plan to build a temporary shelter for Rattata and his friends. Otani wasn't a cruel taskmaster. Kumako was given food and drink and not pushed beyond reason, but he wasn't allowed to be lazy. Bulbasaur kept close watch, and if Kumako dawdled the vine around Bulbasaur's neck would lash out. Kumako screamed when it stung him, and after that he worked properly and didn't dare slack off. Seeing this, Rattata and the others felt a huge relief. They were grateful to Otani for both the shelter and the punishment. Otani accepted responsibility for what had happened, explained how things came to pass, and apologized again. Rattata forgave him at once, not angry, only wishing he'd been stronger so he could have defended the cube himself. Time passed quickly, and all the Pokémon kept busy. After a long day of apologies, Rattata, the leader, finally forgave Kumaru. Kumaru put a paw to her chest and vowed she would never bully Rattata or the others again. In fact, she promised to protect them in Senling. With that, she and Rattata formed an alliance. Later, Otani told Circle Bear that he was free to leave whenever he wanted. Circle Bear hesitated. The food was excellent and the work was light. Where else could he find such a comfortable situation? Seeing his uncertainty, Otani smiled and said he could stay, but only if he pulled his weight. Circle Bear agreed at once. He threw himself into the work and, with Otani and the others helping, finished the temporary shelter before night fell. They lined the inside with soft hay, and after dinner Circle Bear and Rattata happily moved in. Chapter 51. Round Land Shark Evolution. The next morning, Otani woke to find Quanquanxiong and the others already up and hard at work. They'd been busy for a while by the time he stumbled out of bed, and the sight gave him a small, helpless headache. There wasn't much for Pokémon to do on a farm like this. Once the main chores were finished, there simply wasn't enough work to keep them fully occupied. After a quick breakfast together, Otani put the team to work in the fields. Today's task was nothing complicated, just tidying up the ground that had been plowed the day before, and it didn't take long. The Pokémon finished in a fraction of the time Otani expected, and then stood around looking at him with bright, expectant eyes. The sight made his headache deepen. They all wanted more to do. He thought for a moment, and then remembered something bigger that had been nagging him. The farm fence needed repairs. It had been put off for too long. Otani had planned to fix it himself, slowly, whenever he had the time. Now, with so much extra manpower, it made sense to tackle it right away. Dagu took charge. He organized Quanquanxiong, Circle Bear, and the others, showing them how to fell trees and haul the logs back to the yard. Since Circle Bear was strong, Dagu put him on tree cutting and transport duty, while the smaller Pokémon were taught to trim branches and prepare poles. Dagu also walked them through how to build the fence properly, teaching the steps clearly and supervising as they worked. With everyone focused and moving efficiently, the job that would have taken Otani days alone began to shrink quickly. The steady rhythm of chopping, carrying, and hammering filled the morning, the little farm coming to life again under the bustle of teamwork. Little Rattata had a natural advantage. His sharp front teeth made him excellent at trimming wood. The planks he finished were noticeably neater than Otani's. The farm was so large that they needed a constant supply of boards, so the work kept everyone busy. Between that and the small chores around the place, they had more than enough to occupy them until they healed, and by then they hoped they wouldn't be so afraid of being bullied when they returned to the forest. Otani also told Bulbasaur to use the green meadow to raise a lot of seedlings. The Union's law was strict. For every tree you cut down, you had to plant 2 in its place. Failure to do so brought fines, and in serious cases, you could even face imprisonment. The following days fell into a peaceful routine. The only one who seemed restless was Circle Bear. Ever since his last fight with the Round Land Shark, that shark had been pestering him incessantly. There was at least one skirmish every day, sometimes 2 or 3. Fortunately, Otani made sure he was compensated. For every battle, Circle Bear received an extra box of energy cubes. Circle Bear agreed without hesitation. Are you kidding? It's just a fight. I'm Circle Bear. I live for battles. Let's do this. And so, with a mix of pain and pleasure, Quanquanxiong began his life of sparring. At first, fully rested and in top condition, Circle Bear utterly crushed the Round Land Shark every time. But the more they battled, the more obvious it became that the Round Land Shark was improving at an astonishing rate. Almost overnight, its strength would jump. Slowly, the fight stopped being effortless. After a week, the Round Land Shark could trade blows with him and not immediately lose the advantage. Circle Bear found himself wondering, do all Pokémon raised by human trainers get stronger that fast? And that frog-like one, I still can't read him at all. If I stayed here, could I grow as strong as they are? He wrestled with the question for a while, but in the end he chose freedom. Compared with life on a farm with steady food and care, he preferred the independence of the forest. He hadn't been used to a pampered life anyway, and besides, the trainers might not even want us. Once he'd made up his mind, Xiang felt a lot lighter. That morning, Roundland Shtay Ark came to challenge Circle Bear, as he did every day. Before the fight began, Circle Bear told Otani that once this battle was over, he planned to go back to the forest. Otani was surprised for a moment, then relieved. There were always Pokémon who preferred a free life. It wasn't unexpected. "You're free to go," he said. "You can leave anytime. If you miss the farm later, you can come back and visit. You'll always be welcome here." The words moved Circle Bear so much that tears welled in his eyes. He hugged Otani tightly and began to cry. He hadn't expected to be so warmly accepted. Okay, Circle Bear, put me down," Otani said, embarrassed by the embrace. At his voice, Circle Bear let him go. Roundland Shark, impatient, urged them to start. The two opponents squared off, and the battle began. Roundland Shark lunged with a Dragon God dive, charging forward with everything he had, but Circle Bear didn't flinch. He met the attack head-on, slamming into the shark with 100,000 horsepower impact. For a while, the two clashed back and forth, roaring and trading blows, both clearly enjoying the fight. A sudden glow of evolution washed over the round shark, and the Circle Bear froze, waiting for the transformation to finish. In that brilliant light, the round shark's body stretched and shifted, muscles and scales rearranged, until with a final shudder, a new Pokémon stood where the old one had been, Fangshark. Fangshark let out a deep, triumphant roar. Circle Bear answered with a defiant cry, refusing to show any fear. Fangshark opened its jaws and unleashed a torrent of draconic energy. Circle Bear met it head-on with a destructive death beam. The two attacks slammed together in a blinding explosion, throwing up a cloud of smoke and dust. Using the small wings that had just grown from its back, Fangshark burst forward through the haze and was suddenly on top of Circle Bear. With a raised forelimb, it struck with Dragon Claw. The evolved Fangshark was faster now. Circle Bear never had time to brace and took the blow full force, reeling from the impact. It tried to reply with an arm hammer, but Fangshark slipped away with a graceful dodge. The sharp-toothed landshark finished with a backhanded swipe that struck Circle Bear solidly. Using its speed advantage, the fanged shark closed in for close-quarters combat and adjusted to its new body with surprising quickness. In the end, Circle Bear surrendered outright. After Otani tended to his wounds, Circle Bear turned and walked toward the forest. At the tree line he paused, waved to Otani, then without hesitation plunged into the underbrush and disappeared. Otani had intended to wait until he was sure Circle Bear was rested. After all, he'd just been in a fight, but the bear was already gone. The sharp-toothed land shark gave a reluctant wave in Circle Bear's direction. They'd spent enough time together to become good friends, and the sight of him leaving tugged at the shark. He let out a small, spoiled-sounding "Gah!" calmer than Circle Bear in temperament, but still given to childish displays. Otani smiled. He was genuinely happy for him. It hadn't been easy, but he'd finally evolved. Dragon-type Pokémon are notorious for growing slowly. Without outside interference, it can take decades for a dragon to mature from youth to adulthood. With the trainer's help, things changed. As long as there was enough energy to replenish, evolution could be sped up, though even then it still took a full year for the round landshark to become the sharp-toothed landshark. Otani gave him the best resources money could buy, an apparently unlimited supply of perfect cubes. The result was worth it. The new Garchomp did not disappoint. It was worthy of being a quasi-divine dragon-type Pokémon. In its second stage form, it could take down Kugrim, a Pokémon with top gym-level strength. Once it reached its final Tyrannosaurus form, there was no doubt it would climb into the quasi-king tier of power. After the evolution, Otani put the sharp-toothed landshark through a period of adjustment training, so it could learn to use its new body properly. Huabebe, who had been inseparable from the shark since the beginning, was ecstatic. She kept circling him, and the sharp-toothed landshark looked at her with obvious affection. He let Huabebe rest on his head as he carried her around the farm, and her laughter never stopped. Otani watched them with a deep, relieved satisfaction. Seeing his children finally grow up brought him a quiet pride. Otani also firmly believed that children raised with love would return that love. Of course, when it came to shaping their values, he wasn't going to be lax. That evening at dinner, Sharptooth was noticeably more polite, though he still ate with a healthy appetite. Snorlax glanced over, a little surprised by the change in his boss, but he didn't think too much of it. No matter what, he's still my boss, Snorlax thought. After the meal, Sharptooth surprised everyone by offering to help Otani clear the dishes. Warmth spread through Otani at the small, responsible gesture. He reached out and ruffled the landshark's head affectionately. "You've grown up," he said. "Responsible. A real man." "Gow," Sharptooth replied, sounding proud. Otani laughed. "Haha, I'm proud of you, just for that." Sharptooth blushed slightly, then composed himself. "Okay, I won't mess around. I can do this by myself. Huabebe's been waiting for me for a long time." He turned toward where Huabebe sat happily on Snorlax's belly, and the little one waved a cheerful greeting. The sharp-toothed landshark glanced from Dagu to Huabebe and paused, uncertain. "Come on, how can a man be so indecisive?" Otani teased, nudging the creature toward Huabebe and then going back to his business. Chapter 52. Meeting Old Friends. That morning, Otani was in the basement, busy making energy cubes. I, who was watching over his sister, came down to interrupt him. "Someone came to the door," she said. "He says he's a friend of yours. He's waiting in the living room." "Friend?" Otani blinked. He didn't have many acquaintances around here and couldn't place the name. He tidied himself quickly, told his brother, the house's butler, to take care of things for a moment, and headed upstairs. As he stepped into the living room, a familiar voice called out, warm and teasing. "Otani, Otani, long time no see. I didn't expect you'd be doing so well." Otani froze for a second, then recognition hit him. "Mingma, what are you doing here?" Mingma laughed and pulled him into a friendly hug, slinging an arm around Otani's shoulders as he grinned. "Why aren't you welcoming an old friend? I didn't realize you were such a big shot. If I'd known, I would have come sooner and eaten you out of house and home like a tycoon." Otani laughed back. "It's been ages. You have to stay for dinner, and if you're not in a hurry, stay for a few days. I'll treat you well. Even if you don't want me to stay, I'm staying, and I'll eat all your food and drink all your drinks. Eat as much as you like and stay as long as you want." "That's what you said." "That's what I said," Mingma echoed, laughing. While they talked, Otani went into the kitchen and came back with a tray of snacks. They settled on the sofa and fell into easy conversation. "Where have you been all these years?" Otani asked after a while. "You never called, never answered my calls, never replied to my messages. I thought you'd left for good." "Damn you, Otani, how can you say that?" Mingma teased, half scolding but smiling. 5 years ago, after we parted, I spent time traveling. I only just got back to the Johto area. Once I'm settled, I'll come see you more often." "That's great. I want to travel too," Otani said with a touch of envy, "but everything on the farm needs doing. I can't just leave." "You've got a peaceful, comfortable life on the farm," Mingma said. "I envy that. Me, I'm dealing with cold stares from my superiors." "Cold stares? Which company do you work for now?" Otani asked, curious. "Ah, nothing special," Mingma shrugged. "I can't say the company's name," Mingma said, "but I'm considered a core member there, and I hold a small management position." "That's great," Otani replied. They kept chatting easily. Mingma, full name Kamiya Mingma, was a close friend Otani had met on his travels. They'd been traveling together for 5 years, and Mingma had once saved Otani's life in an accident, which had only deepened their bond. They talked about old times until noon slipped by. When Otani stood to go cook, Mingma wandered out across the farm. He paused to watch Radha and the others working. It struck him as a little odd, but he didn't dwell on it. He strolled along the paths, stopping now and then to take in the scenery. From a distance, he saw Bulbasaur and the others training. Even after so long, Bulbasaur recognized him at once and charged over, tail bobbing with excitement. "Oh wow," Mingma said, smiling. "You've grown so much since I last saw you." Bulbasaur greeted him with a cheerful cry, and Venusaur rumbled its approval. Thundermon and the others had never seen Mingma before, so they gathered around him, watching with curious eyes. Mingma greeted each of them cheerfully, clearly pleased by the attention. After finishing preparing the meal, Otani stepped out of the kitchen and noticed Mingma was nowhere to be seen. He walked outside and spotted him a short distance away, happily chatting with his Pokémon. "Time to eat," Otani called out. "Coming," Mingma answered, and led Bulbasaur and the others back into the house to join everyone at the table. Otani was in an unusually good mood. The gentle, quiet side of him seemed brighter and livelier than usual. He joked freely with Mingma throughout the meal. Mingma returned the teasing in kind, bringing up a few of Otani's past embarrassments without hesitation, and the two of them laughed together easily. In the afternoon, Du, who hadn't been around for quite some time, came by the farm. He paused for a moment, surprised to see the new guests, then offered a casual greeting. Otani was quick to introduce Mingma, and although a flicker of awkwardness crossed Mingma's face, he recovered and smiled as he greeted Du. The three of them then settled down and began to talk. Du had never seen Otani so cheerful before. It caught him off guard. He'd known Otani for years, and Otani was normally a gentle, even-tempered man, not particularly modest, but never arrogant. Mingma, meanwhile, was curious how Otani knew someone as well known as Watari. Watari only laughed it off. He'd been won over by Otani's cooking, and the two had become friends. For his part, Watari couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something slightly odd about Mingma. It wasn't anything obvious, just a vague unease, and occasionally Watari noticed that Mingma seemed instinctively guarded around him. Still, Otani and Mingma were engrossed in conversation, so Du had little to add. Once he heard they'd been friends for years, his suspicions eased. Most of the evening, Otani and Mingma carried the conversation, with Du chiming in now and then. During dinner, Otani produced a bottle of wine he'd bought on a whim, a rather expensive one at that. 88 Alliance coins. Back then, I'd been taken in by the salesperson's big promises and paid for the bottle almost on autopilot. I regretted it afterward, but I didn't make a fuss. If nobody drank it, we could just keep it. And yes, there had been a little steering toward extra purchases, but Otani had offered to pay, so I couldn't really blame anyone. Besides, Otani didn't need the money, so I let it go. I never expected that bottle to come in handy today. When Mingma saw the label, he practically lit up. "Otani, you hit a bottle of this?" he said, surprised. "Come on, don't act shocked," Du teased. "I come here all the time, and I've never seen Otani bring this stuff out." "We're in luck today," Mingma laughed. "We're not going home until we're drunk." Otani fumbled with the bottle like someone not used to opening wine, but he managed. He poured a glass for Mingma, one for Du, and one for himself. They lifted their glasses for a quick toast and downed them in one go. "Wow, what a wine!" Mingma exclaimed. Even Otani, who hardly ever drank, sat there smiling, clearly impressed. The liquor was soft and smooth, leaving a faint perfume on the lips and teeth and a pleasant fruity wood aroma in the mouth. It didn't make you drunk so much as clear-headed, refreshing rather than numbing. The table was full of toasts, and the meal stretched late into the night. Otani seldom got drunk, so his brother, who acted as his butler, escorted him back to his room to sleep. Du retired to the room that had been set aside for him. Mingma, however, was thoroughly intoxicated. He staggered into the room Otani had prepared for him, the one next to Watari's. As soon as Du reached his room, he snapped sober. His earlier stupor had been a performance. He stood very still and listened, making sure he couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary. There was nothing. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, he told himself. Chapter 53. Leaving early that morning, Mingma woke with a start. Still half asleep, he fished a black phone out of the hidden pocket in his backpack. A rocket's logo was stamped on the back. 2 messages waited on the screen. Du showed up unexpectedly. The plans changed. Stay in the dark and wait for the right moment. He slid the phone closed, slipped it back into the bag, and went back to sleep. Otani, on the other hand, was up long before dawn. He washed quickly and went straight to the kitchen to make breakfast. Even though he'd been drunk the night before, the strange restorative warmth from his last bath in the light of evolution seemed to speed his recovery. He felt unusually energetic. Du and Mingma were soon awake as well. "Good morning, Du, Mingma. Hurry and wash up. Breakfast will be ready soon," Otani sang in a bright mood. "Good morning, Otani," Mingma answered, but his voice was flat. Du shot him a quick look and left for the bathroom. Mingma noticed the look and felt it like a weight. There was something about the way Du watched him that made his skin prickle, as if Du could see right through him. He forced himself to eat, to be polite, to not give anything away. The plan had shifted overnight. He needed to get the job done as soon as possible and leave. He felt a pang of guilt looking at Otani's cheerful face, but there was no other choice. Breakfast passed without incident. The mood at the table was easy, and Otani seemed completely unaware that anything was amiss. Watari and Mingma both kept their expressions carefully neutral. When they finished, Du muttered that he had something to do and slipped out. Mingma watched his back disappear down the path, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. He stayed there for a moment, then excused himself, complaining that he'd drunk too much the night before and needed to sleep it off, and walked back to his room. Once inside, Mingma retrieved a small remote from his backpack, stretched out on the bed, and began to work it quietly. On the stretch of farm he had walked earlier, tiny machines that had been waiting in hiding stirred to life. They were little more than insect-sized drones, easy to miss against the tall grass. Under Mingma's control, the miniature robots crawled and buzzed toward the warehouse in slow, practiced lines. He wasn't here just to snooze. Mingma had been given a task by his organization: use his cover to pinpoint where Otani was producing the energy cubes. That precise location would be important for whatever plans were coming next, plans Mingma was not privy to. He was only a small team leader, after all. Originally his aim had been simpler: tap Team Rocket's resources to boost his Pokémon's strength. He'd even put together a special disguise for the job. He hadn't expected, however, that his true allegiance would be exposed. Under Mingma's control, the little mechanical insect quickly located the basement. It didn't rush inside. Its orders were only to find and mark the place. The entire operation took the whole morning. Otani assumed Mingma was exhausted and left him be. By noon, though, Otani's worry grew. He went to check on Mingma, half afraid he might be ill. Mingma, quick to cover, pretended to be just waking up and insisted he was fine. He even promised to treat Otani to a good meal in town that evening. Otani didn't press the issue and agreed. That night in Panlin town, they ate at a restaurant, and Mingma chatted cheerfully as if nothing had happened. Otani had only brought Kentaro along, so he'd have something to ride home. Between bites, Mingma said, "Dagu, I'll be leaving after dinner." "Eh? You're in a hurry? It's so late. Why don't you stay one more night?" Otani asked. "I can't," Mingma replied. "The damn company called me in, saying there's an emergency task and I've got to go back and work overtime." "That's rough," Otani said. "Why don't you just quit that place?" "I'll give you the money. Come into town and open a pastry shop. I'll be your exclusive supplier." Mingma felt a flush of gratitude and guilt at once. Once you're in the arena, you have no choice. It's easy to get in, but almost impossible to get out. Are they really that heavy-handed? Did they cheat you with some unfair terms? Otani's concern made his voice sharp. If they've broken alliance laws, you can take them to court. If you have a contract, sue them. He paused and then forced a smile. "Enough of that. Let's not ruin the night. Drink with me." Mingma did his best to steer clear of the painful subject. The two men talked and laughed, and the wine loosened the mood until the room felt light again. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Bulbasaur and the others were gathered in the living room watching TV. The little Pokémon characters Otani had once drawn had been turned into an animated show, and the episode was playing now. Outside, a team of 50 men moved quickly across the fields toward the farmhouse. All of them wore masks. Their leader checked a locator in his hand, tapped the screen to confirm the coordinates, then signaled. The 50 split instantly into 10 teams of 5 and deployed toward the building. They crept up to the warehouse without making a sound. What they hadn't counted on was the farm's defenses. Bulbasaur kept his grass field ability active at all times, even while he slept. After the last intrusion, he refused to be caught off guard again. The slightest fluctuation in the field's energy set him on alert. He sensed the intruder and, without raising his voice, sent a warning through his vines to the Pokémon gathered in the common room. Instantly, everyone was on guard. Venusaur took the lead, slipping out to assess the situation. After a quick survey, he made a decision. He told the Iguanchi siblings to call the police first and then phone Otani. The Iguanchi siblings obediently went to make the calls. Bulbasaur instructed Huabebe to contact Butterfree as well. Caterpillar's home was some distance from the farm's center, and Huabebe could warn them without drawing attention. After cautioning Huabebe to be careful, Bulbasaur ordered all the Pokémon to be ready to fight at a moment's notice. Venusaur bristled. There were too many opponents. Several of them radiated energy on par with its own. That made them hard to pick off, and even harder to fight. Otani's phone rang. It was Iguanchi's sister. Shocked, he and Mingma dashed for the farm. Mingma slipped his own phone from his pocket and with a terse flick sent a text. The man in black at the farm read it, his face going cold. "We're exposed. Move now." The team summoned their Pokémon and stormed the warehouse. They found the basement door soon enough and forced it open. Inside, crates and shelves were stacked with high-grade energy cubes. The leader barked orders, "Only take the best. You've got 5 minutes, no time to waste." "Yes!" Everyone scrambled. Blocks were shoved into space backpacks as fast as hands could work. 5 minutes flew by. Just as they were about to leave, a shaft of light suddenly shot down the stairwell from the basement exit. "Get down!" someone shouted. "Damn, we're trapped! Break out, push through, don't stop!" They obeyed the order. One person led their Pokémon in a full sprint toward the exit, but outside, Butterfree was already pinned. Venusaur stood at the forefront of the defenders, ready. "Split into small teams and break out on your own." "Yes!" came the shouted reply, repeated dozens of times. The men in black split into 10 groups and began forcing their way out. Butterfree held back from using any wide-area attacks. He couldn't risk hitting his own allies, so he focused on directing his people, trying desperately to hold the exits. The attackers, however, pushed forward relentlessly. Many Butterfree were cut down in the fighting. Venusaur was stopped by the lead Scorpion, and their duel dragged on without a clear victor. As the retreat neared completion, the leader called over the Dragon King Scorpion. "Ha ha! Come back. I've left you a nice little present," he said. The King Scorpion dug into the earth and vanished, Ed with him. Bulbasaur stamped its foot in fury. The movement seemed to trigger something. A dangerous pressure filled the air. "Hey!" Bulbasaur cried, and hurriedly warned everyone, shepherding all the Pokémon out of the warehouse. A moment later, the building erupted in a thunderous blast, collapsing into ruins. Wang Yu raced back and finally reached the site, then stood there speechless at the sight of his destroyed warehouse. "Do you have a grudge against my warehouse?" Otani shouted into the smoke, then dropped to checking his Pokémon. He worked quickly, treating Butterfree and the others, stopping bleeding, splinting bruises, while Mingma moved between the wreckage and the injured, helping where he could. It was slow, messy work. By the time they finished cleaning up and dressing wounds, the sun had already begun to set. The attackers hadn't lingered long enough to finish them off. They'd fled after the blast, so none of the Pokémon had been fatally hurt. After the first aid and a few calming potions, everyone was resting and on the mend. Mingma stood a long time staring at the collapsed shell of the warehouse. Otani tried to persuade him to stay the night, but Mingma shook his head and gathered his things. He left without another word. Otani felt odd about it, but he didn't read any malice into Mingma's sudden departure. He figured Mingma must be under a lot of pressure lately and needed to get back. Before Mingma left, Otani hurriedly packed a handful of snacks for him to take on the road. Watching Mingma walk away and looking over the second bombing's ruined walls, Otani felt something tighten inside him. He could no longer pretend the farm's security could stay as it was. The attack had been a warning. He needed to strengthen defenses, and fast. Chapter 54. Newly Built Warehouse and Farm Security Team. The next morning, Otani called Carter again to go over the plans for the new farm warehouse and to explain that they needed to install a security system. After thinking it through, he still didn't feel the place was secure enough, so he went to look for Rada and the others. When he arrived, they were out in the yard, hard at work cutting planks. He found little Rada, their leader, and laid out his proposal: hire their group to handle security. Little Rada agreed without hesitation. Otani went over the terms in detail: wages, food and lodging, and the promise of special training, and the whole crew accepted happily. That settled the security question. The next issue was the blocks for construction. Fortunately, Otani had previous experience with that kind of work. Not all the blocks needed to be assembled right away. Some could be kept in the storage room in the main house, so that could be managed for a while. The only real bottleneck was the large fruit machine. Otani called Dashi, who helped purchase several units, and Oishi confirmed they would be delivered the next day. With those arrangements made, all the urgent matters had been handled. Otani sat in the living room, staring into the middle distance, running through possibilities over and over. He kept returning to the worst one. Had they invited him to dinner yesterday, just to get him off the farm so the attackers could move in more easily? Or was it all a cruel coincidence? Mingma happened to show up at the same time those men decided to strike? He wanted to believe the latter. He tried to make excuses for Mingma. He's my best friend, yet none of the explanations settled. The doubt sat like a stone in his chest. Aiguanshi wanted to go over and comfort Dagu, but her brother put a gentle hand on her arm and shook his head. He knew Otani needed space. Interrupting him now would only make him clamp down and hide his feelings. Better to let him have this time alone and let the emotions surface on their own. They had kept people watching the farm since last night. When Mingma left, some tales followed him from a distance, but Mingma's counter-surveillance instincts were sharp. He quickly shook them off and vanished. The tracker reported back to Du at once. Du didn't scold him. He only told him to return to the farm. It took Otani a while to calm down. After turning it over in his head, one possibility made sense. Mingma might have been forced. If Otani had been at the farm at the time, Mingma's loyalty to him could easily have been exploited to control him and compel Bulbasaur and the others. In that case, the resistance would have been much less. But Mingma hadn't done that. Instead, he'd persuaded Otani to leave the farm under the pretense of taking him out for a meal. Thinking it through eased Otani's worry considerably. It was almost noon, so he hurried to the kitchen to start lunch and called the Pokémon to eat. Then he noticed Huabebe was missing. He asked around, but no one had seen him. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He remembered he hadn't seen the little one all last night either. Otani stopped preparing food and immediately summoned every Pokémon on the farm. They began searching for Huabebe, widening the search area step by step. We searched all the way to the outskirts of Senling and still couldn't find a trace of Huabebe. Otani was beside himself with worry. The corners of his mouth were raw and blistered from nerves. Please, please don't let anything have happened to her, he kept muttering. Then Circle Bear stepped out of the trees and caught Otani's attention with an astonished look. I hurried over with Otani and asked if he'd seen Huabebe. Circle Bear paused, considered carefully, and then shook his head. He hadn't seen her. But he said he wasn't without resources. He had a wide network among the forest leaders, many of whom were his friends. He could send word and organize a search, but it would cost something. He wanted compensation. Otani didn't hesitate. Double the Rawa, RD, he said immediately, if you can find her. Circle Bear gave no reply beyond a nod and slipped back into the woods. About half an hour later, he came out again with 2 pieces of news. One good, one bad. The good, Huabebe's flower had been found. The bad, Huabebe herself wasn't anywhere near it. He knew right away it was Huabebe's flower. The varieties Huabebe had been picking all came from Otani Farm, strains you wouldn't see around here, and Quanquan Bear had spent a long time at the farm, so he recognized it at a glance. Otani hurriedly asked Quanquan to lead him to where the flowers might be. They walked for about 20 minutes before finding the flower under a tree. It was a little battered, but there were no clear signs of human interference. Otani let out a quiet sigh of relief. It looked like Huabebe might simply have wandered away on its own. He closed his eyes and sent out a mental scan of the area. Not far from the flower, he picked up a faint mark on a nearby tree. A closer look confirmed it was the kind of trace Huabebe left. Otani carefully gathered the flower and examined the trunk again. There were more marks like it, faint but deliberate. Calling his Pokémon together, Otani began a systematic search. Kujira and his friends joined in as well. They found additional marks along the same route. Following those traces, Otani and the others pressed deeper into the forest. We crossed the territories of several tribes, and it was Circle Bear who came out to negotiate with us. From those talks, we learned that a group of men in black had passed through here, not long ago. Otani already had a theory about where Hua Bebe had gotten her information. He couldn't help but wonder who had told her, and he was more than a little alarmed that she had the nerve to follow a band of dangerous criminals on her own. We followed the tracks through the trees until we broke out of the forest and came to the foot of a mountain range. As soon as we emerged, a small figure came into view ahead of us. "Bebe," Dagu called. When Hua Bebe saw him, she hurried forward and flew the last stretch. Dagu reached out and caught the exhausted girl, easing her down carefully. He fished a small nutrient cube from his pocket and fed it to her. After she ate it, color came back to her face and she began to recover, panting and gesturing urgently. Otani handed her the handful of flowers he'd just collected. Bebe took them, pressed her energy into one of the blooms, and watched as it was restored to its original, healthy state. She turned to Otani, voice trembling with worry as she began to speak. Otani didn't have time to scold Hua Bebe for being naive. He quickly put the pieces together. Yesterday, she had gone to report to the Butterfree leader, but on her way back, she spotted a group of men in black forcing their way through. She had trailed one of them, careful and silent. Hua Bebe wasn't strong. Her presence was faint, and the men in black were moving in such a hurry that they never noticed her shadowing them. She had followed them into the depths of the mountain and found a hidden cave. Before she left, she had tucked the flowers beneath the mark as a sign, a breadcrumb so Otani and the others could find the place. "I just hoped you'd find it," she said. Dagu could only stare. If he hadn't noticed Hua Bebe was missing at lunchtime, he never would have guessed she was capable of something like this. Otani asked, calm but urgent, how many people were there? Hua Bebe bit her finger, thinking the way a child does, then said, "So many." Otani rephrased the question more directly. "Are there more of them than the ones who attacked the farm last night?" She nodded quickly. "Many more," she answered, "and there were strange machines with them." Otani felt a cold shock. Hua Bebe might have found the group's hidden base. He couldn't take that on alone, so he hurried the Pokémon back to the farm. By the time they arrived, it was already dark. They couldn't even tell the time. As soon as he reached the farmhouse, Otani called Du. Using Hua Bebe's description and his own memory, he sketched a marching map and an approximate location for the base. Du answered immediately and, without wasting a moment, flew to the farm on his Charizard. Otani and Wataru compared notes. "Du," Otani said, "this is probably one of their secret bases. There could be a lot of people inside, maybe even armed with heavy firepower." Wataru took the map Otani handed over. The drawing was detailed and clear at a glance. Du pulled out his phone and started calling people, mobilizing a response. Then he stepped outside, and Otani rushed after him. "This time I'm coming with you," Otani said. "I want to find Mingma and get to the bottom of this." Chapter 55. Dragnet. The Alliance mobilized every available nearby force and quietly summoned a number of high-level trainers. Under Du's command, their objective was simple: wipe out the stronghold in one decisive strike. Because of Nancy's special status, she was not sent. Aside from her, every top combat unit the Alliance could spare was deployed. Strict secrecy was enforced. No one was allowed to carry any electronic devices beyond standard-issue gear. Radios were restricted to secure internal channels only. Under those orders, the troops closed in, quietly surrounding the cave. Inside the stronghold, Lance watched the approaching forces on the monitoring screen and smiled. Well, looks like we have company." "Lord Lance, a subordinate began, but Lance cut him off. "Visitors from afar deserve a proper welcome. Relay my commands. Prepare the base's self-destruct sequence. Everyone else, get ready for combat. Researchers, evacuate first. Destroy everything you can't carry off." "Yes, Lord Lance," the henchman snapped, then hurried away to give the rest of the men their orders. Lance turned back to the bound man on the ground. "Now, let's get down to business, my dear Xiao Ma." "No, Mr. Shenqiao Mingma." Mingma spat angrily up at him, wrists and ankles chafing against the ropes. "Lance, you promised you'd release my family after I finished the job." Lance laughed, amusement flickering across his face. "Of course I did. I, Lance, am well known for my integrity." He exaggerated a bow. "I let them go. Whether they'll survive the wilds of the forest or fall victim to other scavengers, that's another matter." "You bastard." Mingma thrashed uselessly, teeth bared. He pushed against the pebbled ground and spat a curse. His struggles accomplished nothing. The ropes held fast. Heh, Lance's smile turned cold. I don't care what people say about me. I answer to only two things, Lord Sakaki and Team Rocket. And there's one thing I despise more than anything, mice, especially disobedient mice. He raised his boot and drove it down hard on Mingma's temple. Mingma flinched, pain exploding behind his eyes. Blood trickled where the boot had caught him. I almost killed you right then and there, Lance said, heel still planted. But I discovered that Mr. Otani truly cares about you. He actually came himself. He leaned in close, voice low and dangerous. So you'll live a little longer, if Mr. Otani proves useful to me. I can't waste your value, little mouse, Lance said with a smile as he watched the monitors. The screens showed every move the Alliance members made outside the cave. On one of them, Otani's face filled the frame. Otani, I'm sorry! I'm sorry! Mingma's cries echoed, useless and raw. Tears streamed down his cheeks and dripped onto the floor. Lance chuckled. Ha-ha! How touching! I'm almost moved to tears. He drove his boot down on Mingma's skull. Blood welled at Mingma's hairline and trickled down his face. After two crushing blows, Mingma slumped, unconscious, letting out weak groans. Lance curled his lip, scraped the blood off his sole with Mingma's jacket, and grinned. He wanted to put on his performance with care. Golbat, he ordered coldly. Drain him, but don't kill him. He still has uses. The great bat roosting at the cave ceiling unfurled its wings. Its eyes were rimmed in red as it swooped down and fastened on Mingma, sinking its fangs in and drawing blood in heavy draughts. No, Mingma gasped and flailed feebly. His screams faded into choking coughs. His strength ebbed away. After some time, the bat released him, climbed back to the rafters, and hung there with greedy, satisfied eyes. Mingma lay slumped and bleeding on the floor, barely clinging to life. It was clear this wasn't the first time it had fed on human blood. Lance gave a casual wave, and two of his men carried Mingma out of the monitoring room. Lance smoothed his clothes, fixed an immaculate smile on his face, and let a cold glint show in his eyes. Then, step by step, he strode out of the room and toward the cave entrance. Outside, members of the Alliance were inching forward toward the mouth of the cave when a thick black smoke suddenly billowed out. Fall back! Fall back! The commander shouted, and his people scrambled to retreat. Through the smoke, Lance's voice called, amused and calm. Ah, what an honor to have guests! A small aircraft punched through the haze, and dangling beneath it was Mingma. He was barely conscious and blurred, his lips forming a single, urgent word. Go! Go! His whisper was too faint for anyone below to hear. Surround him. Don't let him get away! Lance ordered. A flock of flying Pokémon leapt into the air and encircled the scene. Team Rocket operatives poured out of the cave behind them. The battle was about to begin. Otani spotted Mingma dangling beneath the aircraft, and his heart leapt. He wanted to move, to cut him down, but he kept himself frozen. One wrong step now could cost Mingma his life. Du surged up on the fossil pterosaur, stalking into the air to confront the man who held the hostage. Who are you? He demanded. Lance smiled, but the grin didn't reach his eyes. How rude of you not to know me, he said with a false politeness. I'm Lance, one of Team Rocket's 4 generals. You must be Mr. Du. I've heard your name for a long time. There was something off about him. Du watched Lance closely. Beneath the courteous tone there was a dangerous edge. Lance's whole presence hummed with barely contained madness. I advise you to surrender and tell us where your accomplices are hiding, he said. The Alliance might go easy on you if you cooperate. Then Lance threw back his head and laughed, at first a chuckle that ran quickly into a raw, manic cackle. Ha! 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 Oh, I'm sorry, I really can't help it. This is just too rich, Mr. Du. The laughter snapped into a harder, more ferocious voice. Do you think I'm a child? Even a monkey wouldn't fall for that pathetic excuse. With a quick, practiced motion, Lance hauled Mingma up by the rope and held him out in front of Du like a trophy. So please, he said calmly, eyes glittering, don't do anything rash. I have hostages here. Do you really think you can use that to threaten me? Du froze at the taunt. Lance's lips curled into a crazed smile. Heh, so the messenger of justice, the champion of the League, is so easy to rattle. Before Du could react, a thick vine whiplashed through the air and smashed into Lance's arm. The limb buckled and snapped with a sickening crunch. The same vine sliced through the rope above and snared Ming's horse as it tumbled down, saving it from a fatal fall. Lance barely flinched. With his broken arm raised as if nothing were wrong, he barked an order. Charizard! Flamethrower! Dew made a split-second decision and answered with his own command. Charizard let loose a blast of fire. Dew's other Pokémon followed, unleashing every move they had. The barrage struck Lance and the aircraft around him, then the craft erupted. It was obliterated in an instant. Even as the explosion cleared, Dew's skin crawled. Something about Lance's earlier calm felt wrong. On the ground, the fight had become a brutal melee. The Alliance held the numerical advantage, but rocket operatives were fearless. Many wore explosives strapped to their bodies, ready to take someone with them if they died. That desperation drew most of the attention away from the skirmish in the air, and Otani had already ordered his Pokémon into the fray. Bulbasaur unleashed its energy like a turret at full bore. Raidenmon moved even faster. Before the Team Rocket grunts could blink, they were struck by a blast of electricity so fierce it felt like 100,000 volts, and they crumpled to the ground. The other Pokémon fought just as fiercely, sweeping the area with Bulbasaur as the anchor. The trainers closed ranks too. Otani took command of the ground team and pushed forward. Dew was sending commands to his Pokémon when a bad feeling settled over him. The Lance they dealt with earlier had been a fake. So where was the real Lance? A voice through the chaos. Boys, time to give your lives for Team Rocket, for Lord Sakaki. The grunts trapped below went wild-eyed and answered in unison. For Master Sakaki. They surged forward straight into the ring of rescuers. Don't let him get close, someone shouted, but it was too late. The grunts struck with deadly precision. As their opponents fell, the explosives strapped to the rocket members detonated. Other hidden charges were triggered in turn. Everyone nearby dropped to the ground to shield themselves from the blast. Laughter rang out over the rising smoke. Ah! Then I'll take my leave now. Everyone, we'll reassemble later. Lance, who had looked dead only moments before, suddenly reappeared. He was standing on a pair of gas canisters that shot him away at incredible speed. The canisters belched a thick black smoke that swallowed the area, plunging everything into pitch darkness. Don't even think about running. Dragonite, Extreme Speed, Charizard, Mega Evolve. Dew, riding his pterosaur, barked orders. Dragonite and Charizard launched after Lance. Lance, meanwhile, released his Pokémon to hold them off while he made his escape. 3 members of the Elite Four, along with Kakuko and Kona, gave chase. Only Aju and Seba stayed behind to keep order at the scene. Aju watched the direction Lance had gone with a brief, flickering expression before turning back to his duties. That gave Otani a moment to check on Mingma. He looked close to death. Only Bulbasaur's timely use of natural energy had kept him alive. Mingma's eyes snapped open and he shouted, weak but urgent, Go, Otani! Get out of here! This place is going to explode! Otani froze, stunned. The others had just been getting to their feet. When they heard Mingma's warning, they didn't hesitate. Together they scrambled for the exit, urgency driving them out into the smoke-filled chaos. People were shouting as they ran. The crowd fell back toward the ridge, carrying the wounded with them. Otani stayed calm, helping to ferry the injured to the outskirts and away from the mountain. Then, without warning, a thunderous boom ripped through the air. A column of flame shot straight into the sky. The stronghold was instantly buried under a shower of falling rock. Many people hadn't had time to escape. Whether they lived or died was unknown. Move! Get them out! Sheba barked, sending his Pokémon out to begin search and rescue. The mountainside was a ruin. Damn Team Rocket, Otani muttered, clenching his jaw. With Bulbasaur's aid, Mingma's condition improved enough to be moved. Special medical personnel arrived, treated him, and took him away under strict guard. Otani only had a moment to collect himself before joining the rescue effort. Fortunately, those who hadn't cleared the blast zone in time had been located far enough from the epicenter. Thanks to their fitness and the help of Pokémon, no one was confirmed dead, but many were grievously injured. If they weren't treated quickly, some would be left permanently disabled. Chapter 56. The Dust Settles. As the rescue continued, more survivors were pulled from the wreckage. Clearance and recovery on the site stretched on for a month, but Otani did not stay to help with the later work. Mingma returned to the farm shaken and exhausted. He was treated and didn't regain consciousness for a week. When he finally woke, Dagu came to visit. Mingma felt hollow with guilt and couldn't bring himself to meet Dagu's eyes. Otani only sighed and said little. He already had a clear sense of how everything had unfolded. Mingma had joined the Rockets about a year after they'd parted ways. He'd thought he could make use of their resources without getting pulled in, but instead he'd been trapped. For a time, things went smoothly. Then Lance found him. Lance had asked him to get close to Otani and act as an informant. Mingma had resisted at first, but when Lance captured his parents and used them as leverage, he had no choice but to go along. In desperation, he'd come back to the farm. The Alliance search team later found 2 bodies near the bombed base. Identification confirmed they were Mingma's parents. When the investigators told him, Mingma collapsed. He broke down, sobbing, and finally told the Alliance everything he knew. Otani's anger had cooled into something much more complicated. He stared at the hollowed face of his old friend, and unable to find many words, forced a smile. "Mingma," he said, "since you cooperated and didn't do anything worse, the Alliance will consider a lighter sentence. We'll try to get you leniency." Mingma bowed his head. "I'm sorry, Otani. At first I was furious. I couldn't understand why you did what you did. But when I found out my uncle and aunt had been taken, I asked myself what I would have done in the same situation. I would have made the same choice. In front of absolute power, we feel so helpless." "You've got to hold on," Otani replied, the words gentler now. "You still have your sister, Xiaofei. Behave while you're inside. Fight for a reduced sentence. Get out as soon as you can." "Mingma, Otani, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The guilt and grief that had been coiled up inside him finally snapped. Mingma broke down, sobbing so hard he could barely stand. He knew he could have acted, could have grabbed at something, done something to stop what happened to his family, but he hadn't. Otani stepped forward and folded him into a careful, steady hug. Mingma broke down all at once. His sobbing was raw and wrenching. Otani stayed by his side and simply held him. There was a bleak sort of logic to it. Surviving something like this could be a turning point. If Mingma wanted to use the chance to cut ties with Team Rocket and start over, maybe it was for the best, but Otani couldn't follow the other part of his thinking. Mingma talked about walking away with Team Rocket's resources as if they were free for the taking. Was he out of his mind? Otani couldn't tell whether Mingma was being brave or foolish. After a long time crying, Mingma finally exhausted himself and fell asleep, his shoulders still shaking with the occasional sniffle. Otani came back to the ward the next morning like he always did. A little girl stood at Mingma's bedside, clutching his hand, her small face wet with tears. She looked up with frightened, hopeful eyes when Otani entered. "Mr. Otani," Mingma said in a thin voice, "please, take care of Xiaofei for me." "Don't worry," Otani said. "I'll look after her." "Thank you," Mingma whispered. Dagu took Xiaofei's hand and led her toward the door. At the threshold, Otani crouched down and lifted the child into his arms. She buried her face into his chest for a moment, then peered up at him. "Brother?" she said in a tiny voice. "Where are Mom and Dad? Why haven't they come back? I'm so scared." Otani smoothed her hair and spoke softly, steadying both of them. "You don't have to be scared, Xiaofei. I'll stay with you, I promise. Your brother's going away to study and won't be back for a few years," Otani said gently. "You can stay with me, until he returns, okay? There are a lot of strong Pokémon at my place, and lots of beautiful Butterfrees." Xiaofei's attention drifted to Dagu, and her sadness softened. She curled both small arms around Dagu's neck and kept glancing back at Mingma in the ward. Mingma forced a bright smile and waved. Xiaofei waved back just as happily. Otani and Mingma exchanged a look and nodded. Mingma's eyes were full of gratitude. When Otani picked Xiaofei up and left the hospital, the Alliance investigator returned to his post outside the ward and resumed his watch. The doctor said that once Mingma had fully recovered, he would have to serve 2.5 years in the Alliance prison. The farm felt unfamiliar to Xiaofei, and she clung to Dagu as they arrived, wide-eyed and a little frightened. Otani stroked her hair affectionately and began introducing the residents one by one. The Pokémon all took to the delicate little girl at once. especially the butterfrees, which fluttered around her as if to welcome her to her new home. She pored over Xiaofei with overflowing motherly affection. Even Otani could not get in the way. He could only stand by and, helpless, laugh and weep at the sight. In the days that followed, Xiaofei slowly adjusted to life on the farm. Pokémon played with her every day, tumbling and fluttering about until she giggled herself to sleep. She often asked when her brother would return and where her parents were. Each time, Otani's throat tightened, he would smile and tell her, "Your brother has gone away to study. He'll be back soon. Your mom and dad have traveled very far and won't be coming home for a long time. But they're like the stars in the sky, watching over you every day as you grow up happily." Hearing that, Xiaofei would wave both hands toward the heavens and call up, "Mom, Dad, Xiaofei is doing great. You must come back soon." Once Xiaofei's affairs were settled, Otani set about finishing the outstanding orders he'd been given. He also beefed up the farm's security. He hired Rattata and several other Pokémon to patrol day and night, while Butterfree covered the fields from above. To thank them for their work, Otani cooked large, delicious meals and prepared energy blocks as rewards, making sure the patrollers were well fed and properly compensated. The incident had terrified him, but it had also woken him up. Otani had convinced himself the world of Pokémon couldn't get any worse, forgetting that there is a difference between virtual threats and real ones. Teams like Rocket, Galactic, Magma, and Aqua, those terrorist organizations, always seemed bent on destroying the world for reasons that never made sense. At the end of the day, it all came down to self-interest. They were selfish people pursuing their own ambitions. At one point, Otani had thought that as long as he kept his head down and didn't provoke anyone, he'd be safe. He wanted to slap himself for being so naive. Ever since he'd learned to produce perfect quality cubes, he shouldn't have assumed he could hide. Those cubes had long been coveted by all the major powers outside. Without the protection of the Du and Yulong families and the strong resistance of the Alliance president, he would already have been kidnapped and forced to churn out cubes until he dropped. The best of those, he would likely have been forced to marry into some family and become one of them. Otani drew a deep breath. He wasn't the helpless person he used to be. Bulbasaur already had the power of a quasi-king. With Butterfree's leader aura and the support of its tribe, Butterfree could reach true king-level strength, and, when coordinating with the tribe, pull off even more devastating moves. Raidenmon and the others were on the verge of a breakthrough too. Once that happened, Otani would genuinely be a quasi-king-level trainer. No one would dare mess with the farm. They had already stepped up security and surveillance, which made the place much safer. But Otani was still terrified. The farm meant everything to him. He couldn't afford to lose it. After thinking through, he came up with a plan to make the farm even more secure. He decided to build a horn beetle enclosure on the far side of the property and set up an underground hive for a trio of giant bees. With powerful tribes guarding from 3 directions, the farm's defenses would be far stronger. Butterfree could train those insects in leader aura too. Maybe they'd become leader-level Pokémon themselves. That would give him 2 more Pokémon capable of king-level power. There was also a lake behind the farm where he could raise aquatic Pokémon for an additional layer of protection. If everything went according to plan, more tribes, a lake full of defenders, advanced surveillance, and Butterfree's training, nobody would bother them again. Even champions wouldn't come through a 3-tribe siege unscathed, would they? Who could possibly drag Arceus down on my little farm? Who'd be that stupid? Otani rubbed his forehead, feeling foolish for even thinking it. And the Rockets, those bastards, they'd definitely come after me. Just wait until I grow up. As soon as the idea occurred to him, Otani moved on it. The next morning he called Carter and commissioned both the unicorn beetle houses and the underground 3B houses. Drawing on the lessons from the caterpillar house, Otani decided to order 200 of each type and to have Butterfree and the others take the first batch with them. Carter sent a construction crew that same day to survey the land and draft plans. With the preliminary work out of the way, they were ready to begin. The project progressed efficiently overall, but the underground 3B houses proved a bit more complicated. building below ground required the Alliance's approval. Fortunately, a single phone call from Otani, with Watari stepping in to smooth the process, secured the necessary authorization that afternoon. There was one more matter to settle: a venue for the Olympus trials. The Alliance preferred a cautious approach, so they approved building a small-scale testing facility near the farm to run trial events, assess real-world effects, and identify ways to mitigate risks. They set aside a large tract of otherwise wasted land exclusively for Otani's use as the Olympus trial site. The only caveat was financial. Otani would be responsible for all construction costs. The Alliance agreed to handle the staff, so Otani no longer had to worry about that part himself. The event itself remained Otani's property, and the profits would be split 70-30 in his favor. Otani 70%, the league 30%. Otani would, however, cover the staff salaries out of his own pocket. I told Carter about building the trial site. When he heard what a big job it would be, he grew so excited he practically jumped out of his chair. I handed him full responsibility for the project, and he immediately puffed out his chest, swearing he could manage everything and would find extra hands if manpower ran short. After so many successful collaborations, Otani trusted Carter implicitly. Once he handed over the site drawings, he left Carter to it. Those events hammered home for Otani just how important strength really was. To outsiders, it might have seemed incredible that he'd risen to quasi-king level in only a year, but that rank still wasn't enough to face Team Rocket. In the last battle up in the mountains, Otani was all but useless. He could only deal with the small fry, while Lance's power proved absolutely terrifying. He'd been outnumbered, 1 against 3, and one of them a champion, but he still managed to get away. He held out long enough for Team Rocket's reinforcements to arrive, and then slipped off. When he came back that day, Dew's face was so gloomy you could practically wring water out of it. Granny Kikuko, however, was unfazed. After checking there was nothing more she could do, she went back to the Tokiwa gym. Kona and Watari had come to the farm together. They stayed only 1 day and then left. The Alliance was launching a comprehensive sweep of Kanto and Johto. This time they were determined to root out every last Team Rocket cell in both regions, so they would be tied up for a long while. Back on the farm, Otani kept himself busy. The Supercube instrument had survived the explosion. Every other piece of equipment was shattered, but the Supercube was intact. Otani silently gave Devon Company a mental thumbs up. Its build quality was excellent. Even after such a powerful blast, there wasn't a single scratch on it. He knew there was no shortcut. The most direct way to strengthen a Pokémon was to increase its energy intake. As his Pokémon grew stronger, the perfect quality cubes gradually lost their edge. They still had value as nutritional supplements after a training session, but they no longer produced the dramatic gains they once did. The only item that still reliably worked was the Supercube. Fortunately, with Otani's current income, he could easily afford the consumption. Funding wasn't an issue. Otani's plan was simple and a little wasteful. Each of his main Pokémon would get 1 Supercube a day, eaten immediately. A lot of the cube's energy would be wasted this way, but it was the quickest method to produce visible results. The flower fields were the simplest option for now. He decided to wait until the Unicorn Beetle Barn and the 3B house on the farm were completed before beginning any large-scale planting. Not long after, Kanto and Johto launched a region-wide crackdown on criminal organizations. Team Rocket and several smaller black market groups were hit hard. The news ran daily. Some of the groups that escaped direct hits quietly moved out of the area, which in turn caused new problems for neighboring districts. Local people demanded answers and accountability from the Alliance headquarters. The Alliance headquarters had taken a hard line, then softened it, offering concessions and sweeteners until the other side agreed to cooperate fully with the operation. None of that involved Otani, though. The real problem had arrived at his doorstep without warning. He woke up to find Sakaki roaming his living room, taking everything in as if it were a museum. "Good morning, Mr. Otani. Sorry to intrude," Sakaki said politely. Otani's blood ran cold. How had Sakaki gotten in with security supposedly so tight? Beside Sakaki stood a strange, armored Pokémon, Mewtwo, unmistakable even with the plating. Of course he'd brought Mewtwo. Otani couldn't very well admit he'd been wrong about the security breach, so he forced a smile. "Sakaki, what brings you to my little farm?" he asked, trying for casual. Sakaki got up, went to the kettle, and poured tea into 2 cups. He set one on the coffee table, then sat opposite Otani. Bulbasaur and the other Pokémon clustered nearby, eyes fixed warily on Sakaki and Mewtwo. Bulbasaur, especially, felt uneasy. Mewtwo's power was impossible to read, and that made it refuse to relax. Mewtwo stiffened at the hostile energy coming from Bulbasaur and the others, his body coiling as if to strike. Sakaki stepped between them in time and said firmly, "Mr. Otani is my friend, not my enemy." At Sakaki's voice, Mewtwo eased back into stillness, though his tail flicked now and then, a constant reminder of how dangerous he could be. Otani signaled to Bulbasaur and the rest not to be nervous. There was no point. They were no match for Mewtwo. "Come on, try Mr. Otani's pastry. His baking is the best in the league. I had some before, and I can't forget it," Sakaki said, smiling. He picked up a pastry from the plate and held it out. Mewtwo hesitated for a moment, then took it, closed his eyes, and tasted it carefully. It was indeed delicious. The tension left him, and a relaxed, almost content expression crossed his face. Mewtwo looked at Otani with surprise. An ordinary human had made something this good, then reached for another piece and began eating. Sakaki leaned back on the sofa, sipping his tea and nibbling on the snacks, clearly content and in no mood for confrontation. The room settled into an unusually calm silence. Otani could only smile apologetically. He refilled Sakaki's teacup, fetched a few more snacks while they chatted, and tried to keep the mood light. After about half an hour, Sakaki finally seemed satisfied and set his cup down. "I came mainly to clear up a misunderstanding with you, Otani," Sakaki said. "Lance's actions the other day were entirely his own. I had no idea what he was planning, and I've punished him severely for it. I wanted to apologize to you in person." Otani laughed and waved a hand. "Aha, really, it's fine. As long as it's sorted out, I don't hold it against you." He grinned. "If you hadn't known, though, that would have caused trouble. And if Lance ever pulled something like that without your consent again, I'd be furious." Sakaki kept smiling. "I understand you were upset. Anyone would be. As a gesture of apology, I'd like you to have something of mine." He reached into his arms and produced a slim book. The title on the cover read, "The Mystery of the Earth." Otani took the book almost without thinking. The book had been written by Sakaki himself. It went into painstaking detail about Train in ground-type Pokémon, a hand-holding, step-by-step manual that left almost nothing to guesswork. Otani only skimmed it, but even that was enough for him to take away several useful techniques. Sakaki watched him with a quiet smile. "Of course, that book alone won't cover everything," he said. "I admire your skills, Mr. Otani. I'd like to invite you to join Team Rocket as a special consultant. In our hierarchy, you'd be second only to me. Your only obligation would be to supply us with a regular batch of energy cubes. You won't need to get involved in any other operations. This will stay within the organization. I'll make sure that, aside from senior management, nobody else knows. It won't interfere with your normal life." Otani went quiet and began weighing the offer in his mind. Sakaki didn't press him. He lounged on the sofa, sipping tea and nibbling at snacks with the air of someone who had all the time in the world. Chow Meng sat nearby, silent as well, occasionally reaching for another bite. For a moment, the room was still. Otani hadn't expected to find himself in such a passive position, the kind of position Mingma had once been in. He didn't know yet whether he would accept. Chapter 58. Forced Sakaki smiled, sensing Otani's hesitation, and decided to press his advantage. "Mr. Otani, I understand your concerns. Team Rocket does operate in the shadows. I won't deny that. I'm not a kindly man by nature, but I have a great deal of tolerance for people I admire. Once you become one of our officers, those rebellious types below will fall in line because of your position." Otani felt his heart lurch. From the way Sakaki leaned in, it was clear he wouldn't let him walk away easily. All the events so far, the pressure, the negotiations, the timing, looked like they had been arranged to steer him to this moment. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he was that Sakaki had planned this from the start, trying to make him surrender without a fight. For a simple farmer like himself, it felt like an enormous, painstaking effort had been made to win him over. He breathed out slowly, sat in silence for a long moment, then spoke, his voice tight but steady. I agree to join Team Rocket, but I have 3 conditions. Go on, Counselor Otani, Sakaki said, his smile never wavering. First, Otani said, I will not take part in any of Team Rocket's operations, except those directly related to the energy cube. I will not be involved in thefts, raids, extortion, or any other criminal activities. Sakaki's smile flickered, a brief, calculating pause, then smoothed back into place. That can be arranged. Your expertise is what we want for the energy cube project. Second, Otani continued, I want you, Mr. Sakaki, to personally guarantee the safety of my family and everyone in my village. No harassment, no reprisals, no requisitioning of goods, nothing. If I join, it's so I can protect them, not endanger them. Sakaki inclined his head. Consider it promised. Your village will be left in peace, and your new status will provide them with protection rather than harm. Third, Otani said, his jaw set, if at any time Team Rocket orders me to harm innocent people or to commit acts I swore never to be part of, I will leave. There must be no punishment, no retaliation against me or anyone I care about if I walk away. Silence spread across the room. Even Sakaki, who rarely showed surprise, was momentarily taken aback by the firmness in Otani's voice. After a slow, assessing look, Sakaki chuckled softly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Otani, but your terms are reasonable enough, and they suit my purposes. You want to work on the energy cube and protect those you love. I want someone whose conscience will keep a leash on the others. Very well. You will be an officer in name and in authority for the cube project. Your family's safety will be guaranteed by me personally. And if you ever refuse an order that violates your conditions, you'll be free to go, though I hope it won't come to that. Otani nodded, relief and unease warring in his chest. He had not trusted the Rockets, but the alternative, defying a man like Sakaki, had felt far worse. Still, the promises made him feel less like a pawn and more like someone with a voice. Then it's settled, Sakaki said, rising. He extended his hand. Welcome to Team Rocket, Counselor Otani. Otani hesitated only a moment before taking the hand. The contact was cool and firm, like sealing a bargain with a blade in the dark. Around them, other faces in the room shifted, some approving, some skeptical, but none spoke. As he let go, Otani forced a small, bleak smile. He had agreed to step into the world Sakaki offered, under conditions that he hoped would keep his people safe. Whether that choice would save them or drag them deeper into danger, only time would tell. Have Sakaki keep Team Rocket away from my relatives and friends, Otani said. And third, if it's not necessary, please don't let any member of Team Rocket meet me in person, Mr. Sakaki. All of that can be taken care of, Sakaki replied. As for the cubes, someone from Silver Corporation will contact you. The name stopped Otani cold. Silver Corporation, the same company that, in the e-game, served as Team Rocket's headquarters before it was destroyed. He hadn't expected to hear that name in real life. Well, I won't keep you any longer, Sakaki said, rising to leave. Then, as if remembering something, he paused. By the way, Counselor Otani, could I take some snacks with me? Of course. Otani jumped up and hurriedly packed a generous bundle of snacks for him. Sakaki laughed softly. How polite of you, Mr. Otani. I'll be off then. He handed the snacks to Mewtwo. The psychic Pokémon levitated them for a moment, then opened a ripple in the air with its psychokinetic power. In an instant, Mewtwo and Sakaki vanished from Otani's living room. Otani sat still for a few heartbeats, listening for any sign they had remained. When the house was truly silent, he sagged back onto the sofa and let out a long breath. Outside the street was busy as ever. No passerby had noticed what had happened inside. The sight and the sheer power of Mewtwo had been terrifying. I lay on the couch a long time before I finally felt like myself again. When I got up, I went into the kitchen and started making breakfast. Bulbasaur and the others looked restless. They couldn't stand feeling powerless whenever I got into trouble. Their hunger for strength had never been greater. After breakfast, they all threw themselves into training. Watching them pushed at me with helplessness. Reaching quasi-king level in a single year was already astonishing, but the opponents we were facing weren't normal at all. I slipped downstairs to the basement and quietly helped the Pokémon assemble that day's super cubes. Time raced by. A month passed in the blink of an eye, and spring finally arrived. 2 new buildings on the farm were completed, and I rang the breeder to place an order. 200 unicorn beetles. Trebi bees were harder to come by, but the breeding house manager promised he could get them. It would take a week. I didn't hesitate and paid in full for the beetles and put down deposits for 3 bees. When the unicorn beetle larvae arrived, they were wide-eyed and nervous in the new surroundings. They trembled with fear when they saw the enormous butterfree hovering over them. The butterfree leader sent out a soft wave of mental energy that quickly calmed the unicorn beetles and began to communicate with them. As they relaxed, the beetles started to look around curiously. The previously different-colored unicorn beetle hesitated for a moment, then mustered the courage to crawl over. The hornworms that had recently arrived at the farm were warm and welcoming when they saw their own kind. Having been raised in a breeding facility, they showed no prejudice. The multicolored beetle and the newcomers quickly struck up a friendship. She was clearly delighted, her eyes narrowing into a happy, contented slit. She even volunteered to show the new arrivals around the farm. Otani watched the scene with a smile, quietly relieved. It seemed she had finally come out of her psychological trauma. Afterwards, Otani prepared a special medicine for the unicorns, an improved version of his previous formula, well within his current abilities. With that formula, the hornworms' bodies could be carefully regulated, and they would gradually grow stronger, eventually developing along the lines of the butterfree tribe. The next step was to prepare their food. Hornworms are omnivores, so their feed must be well balanced. There were also individual energy blocks. Every Pokémon on the farm now had its own exclusive energy block, Rattata and the others included. Otani treated them all the same in that respect. He called the hornworms in for dinner, watched them eat contentedly, and nodded. This should work. After they finished, he went over a few simple farm rules with them, like not wandering off alone. When the farm work was done and he'd eaten lunch, Otani picked up the book Sakaki had given him and began to read. To be honest, Sakaki was clearly one of the Alliance's greatest prodigies. The Secret of the Earth distilled years of Sakaki's insights and laid out detailed training strategies for ground-type Pokémon. Sakaki was also unusually generous with his knowledge. He'd published the book and sold it at a very modest price. His mindset is impressive and frighteningly single-minded. Sakaki will do whatever it takes to reach his goals. No wonder President Damaranch handed him the Alliance presidency, even though he knew Sakaki was the leader of Team Rocket. With that kind of vision and those kinds of methods, he can accomplish enormous things wherever he goes. For a moment I let myself wonder, if Sakaki abandoned his past and took the presidency for real, would the Alliance become a better place? I shook my head to get rid of the thought and plunged back into my books. I spent the entire afternoon reading, though I only made it through a small section. By going over each explanation again and again, new things began to make sense. Sakaki really is gifted. I closed the book and tried to piece together everything I'd learned about him. He's from Tokiwa City. In his day, the Alliance was still young and disorganized. It didn't have the systems it has now. Chaos breeds all sorts of pests, snakes, insects, rats, and ants, and that disorder made life miserable for the lower classes. Sakaki's life began in hardship. As a boy, he suffered greatly, until one day in the Evergreen Forest, he was touched by the will of Evergreen and granted the power of Evergreen. His first Pokémon was a Beedrill, which became his first faithful companion. After he also acquired the power of Tokiwa, his rise was swift. As an adult, he brought the criminal elements of Johto and Kanto under a single banner, founded Team Rocket, and then moved into the shadows. From those covert roots he launched Silver, a legitimate corporation. With Team Rocket's backing, Silver rapidly captured most of the market in both regions and became the dominant company, and in turn provided Team Rocket with a steady stream of funding. Sakaki's ambitions only grew. After cleaning up his public image, he turned to politics and took control of the Tokiwa Gym, earning the epithets Sakaki of the Earth and the Undefeated General. He concentrated on business, cultivated popular support, and set his sights on the Alliance's presidency. Otani, who stood behind him, knew of these plans, but when the decisive moment came, their effort collapsed. Sakaki's life became the stuff of legend, worthy of a chronicle. Of course, he did not rise without paying a price. Since he'd started running Team Rocket, he could no longer tap into Tokiwa's power. That didn't trouble Sakaki Otani anymore. After dinner, Otani planned to keep reading, but the head of the Silver Tokiwa division arrived quietly at the farm and was stopped at the gate. Otani signaled him in, and Butterfree admitted the visitor. The division head smoothly produced a contract, completed the necessary formalities, and left without hesitation. He said a special transport team would come to the farm to deliver the goods. The whole process was legal and compliant, and the transfer would be safe. The short episode didn't disturb Otani's mood for studying, but no sooner had the division head left than Du showed up. Otani put his book away. Du came in without ceremony and flopped onto the sofa. "Dagu, get me something to eat. I'm starving." Otani went to the kitchen with practiced ease and made a neat bowl of egg noodles. Du grabbed his chopsticks and slurped them down while Otani sat back down with his book and casually asked a question. "Has work been going smoothly lately?" Watari asked. "It's been all right," Otani said, "but something strange happened. Every member of Team Rocket vanished overnight." Otani felt a small, private thrill as he remembered Sakaki's promise. Sakaki had actually done what he said he would. "Isn't that a good thing?" Watari replied, calm but cautious. "Yes, but as long as the rockets exist, they're a danger. Them disappearing from plain sight only makes them harder to track if they go underground." He yawned loudly. "I won't go on. I'm exhausted. I'm going to sleep." "All right, you get some rest. I'll stay up a little longer." Watari glanced at the book Otani had been holding. "You're reading Sakaki's book." "A friend gave it to me," Otani said. "Speaking of Sakaki," Watari mused, "he isn't exactly a saint, but I really admire how generous he is. He shares everything he's learned without holding back. In the whole alliance, aside from Professor Oak, he's the only one like that." Watari yawned again and went back to his room. Otani closed the book and set it down, but the words didn't draw him in anymore. Sakaki had written a book, published it. The thought lingered, and for the first time that night, Otani felt something like unease rather than curiosity. Otani paused and ran the idea through his mind. What would happen if he broke the cultivation monopoly? He pictured the fallout, powerful interests threatened, reprisals, the kind of trouble that wouldn't stop at a reprimand. After a long moment of thought, he let the notion go. Even if he wanted to publish his findings, he couldn't risk doing it under his own name. Professor Oak could serve as a cover, or at least lend the kind of credibility and protection Otani lacked. Having made up his mind, he turned back to his papers and read on, absorbed, long into the night. Chapter 59. The Arrival of the Bees. A week flew by, and Musashi, Kojiro, and Meowth had already settled into life on the farm. Their complexions looked healthier, and thanks to their hard work, the newly expanded flower field was nearly finished. That morning, the breeder called with good news. All 3 bees had arrived. Otani was in high spirits and even treated himself to an extra bowl of rice at lunch. He'd handed over the daily chores to Musashi and the others, and he'd relaxed his role in battles as well. Now he mostly acted as a referee. When challengers came, Otani let the Pokémon handle things themselves. Given their strength, they could see most fights through without constant commands. After all, there weren't many top-tier trainers wandering around here. In the afternoon, Otani waited eagerly for the delivery. 3 Bees honey was a coveted product, on par with Moo Moo milk, so a single colony fetched a high price. That didn't faze Otani now, and when the nursery truck finally pulled up, his anticipation paid off. When the 3 Bees arrived at the farm, Otani's mood brightened even more. He welcomed each one with a laugh and inspected them carefully. The little creatures showed no fear of strangers. They buzzed up and greeted Dagu as if they already knew him. After the delivery team left, Otani phoned the breeder. He told him he'd be ordering another batch soon and asked him to keep an eye out for any special specimens. The breeder agreed at once. Otani carried the 3 bees to their new home, a small hive shaped like the species itself. The entrance led down into a wide, open chamber, all arranged to mimic a wild 3-bee nesting site. The newcomers explored the space eagerly and seemed genuinely pleased. As he watched them settle in, Otani spotted a tiny red mark on the middle of one bee. It was a female. The mark was smaller than usual and easy to miss among the swarm, a subtle detail that most buyers wouldn't notice. Female 3Bs were rarely sold. Breeders normally kept them because only females can develop into queens. Realizing what he had found, Otani felt a flush of excitement. This was a fortunate find. Otani walked over to Mimi Bee and asked why she had come to the farm. The three little bees chattered excitedly to Dagu that they'd sneaked in and been hiding behind the other bees. Otani checked them over, then led them out to the huge flower field he'd just finished planting. The moment they reached the blooms, the bees could hardly contain themselves. They darted from flower to flower, gathering pollen. Otani left them to it and went back to his room to prepare the special formula he'd made for them, following the same method he'd used for the caterpillars. Both the bees and the unicorn beetles adapted faster than he'd expected, likely because Butterfree was helping to nurse them. The bees' hive got established sooner than the unicorn beetle's enclosure and had already begun producing honey. The unicorn beetles, by contrast, were still eating, drinking, and sleeping to build up the energy they needed to evolve. Only once they grow into giant bees will they be able to make honey. Bulbasaur and the others were training hard. Thanks to Otani's upgrades using Krypton Gold, Bulbasaur had officially reached king level. Raiden and Kenta, the first Pokémon to follow Otani, had already broken through to quasi-king level. Most of the others weren't far behind. Except for Huabebe, Otani always respected each Pokémon's own wishes. If a Pokémon didn't want to fight or get stronger and just wanted a quiet, free life, he had no objection. As long as they were happy, he was happy to support them. That afternoon, the three bees buzzed around him, proud of the honey they'd produced, and happily offered him a taste. Otani scooped a little up with his finger and tasted it. The sweetness clung pleasantly to his lips and teeth, sweet without being cloying, with a lingering floral fragrance. It was, without a doubt, excellent honey. Any dessert made with it would be that much better. So he asked the bees for a jar and went back to the kitchen. Today, he planned to make a dessert he'd often enjoyed in his previous life, cream puffs. He poured in the milk, stirred in the honey, and whipped the cream until it was light and smooth. Finally, he filled the puffs with the honey-sweetened cream, smiling at how the simple flavors came together. Otani couldn't wait to try one. The cream burst on his tongue, and the three bees' honey folded perfectly into the whipped cream from Moo Moo milk. It was heavenly. He scooped up another and carried the finished puffs out of the kitchen to share. Everyone raved about them, especially the three bees, who already had a sweet tooth. Dagu's cream puffs had completely won them over. They danced happily around him in delight. Otani made a large batch and asked Landshark to deliver some to Grandpa Fumin and Grandma Shizi. While they sipped tea and munched on the treats, Daigo arrived at the farm riding his Metagross. They found seats and settled in casually, drinking tea and snacking together. Then Daigo explained why he had come. After helping Tai Dumbbell recover last time, Daigo had taken him home to recuperate. Tai had since made a full recovery, and ever since he'd been pestering Daigo to bring him out to the farm. Otani glanced over at Tai, who was contentedly nibbling a cream puff. When Tai Yaling saw Dagu watching him, he buzzed over happily and nudged Dagu, inviting him to reach out. "This little guy insists on going back to the old farm and being your Pokémon," Daigo said with a helpless laugh. Otani looked surprised. He glanced at Iron Dumbbell, who returned the look and gave a firm, affirmative nod. Then Otani looked back at Daigo, who only shrugged and said, "It's up to you." Iron Dumbbell was a rare mineral Pokémon. It communicated with its trainer through magnetic fields and survived on various ores, magnets being its favorite. To evolve, an Iron Dumbbell needed to consume a great deal of magnetic ore. When two Iron Dumbbells on the verge of evolution met, they would transform into a metal monster, and when two metal monsters met, they would evolve into a Metagross. Metagross was monstrously powerful, but the conditions required for those evolutions were brutal. Only very wealthy heirs, people like Daigo, could afford to raise a whole group of them. Otani leaned closer and asked softly, "Iron Dumbbell, have you really thought this through? If you come with me, it might be hard for you to ever evolve into a Metang. and eventually a Metagross, Daigo warned. The iron dumbbell hesitated for a moment, then gave a firm nod. If that's what you want, then please take care of me, it seemed to say. Otani produced the Pokeball, and the iron dumbbell went in without protest. When Otani released it again, the Pokémon cuddled up to him, all playful and affectionate, but very heavy. Nearly 100 kilos pressed down on Otani's arms and left him a little breathless. Luckily, the embrace didn't last long. The iron dumbbell soon turned its attention to the snack puffs and started devouring them. Looks like the farm was getting another big eater. Fortunately, one Daigo could afford. He still respected the iron dumbbell's choice. After all, everyone had thought the little one wouldn't survive, and it had been Otani who saved its life. Otani loved Pokémon. Handing the iron dumbbell over to him felt right. As for the future training, that was Otani's concern, not his. Those puffs are really good, Daigo thought. I should try to sneak some away later. Chapter 60. Spring is here. Everything revives. In the end, Daigo shamelessly helped himself to all the remaining puffs. 3 bees had only just begun producing honey, so supplies were slim. That meant 3 bees' honey puffs would be off the menu for a while. To make up for it and appease the disappointed Pokémon, Otani baked a batch of macarons, bright, delicious little treats that were as pretty as they were tasty. Time passed quickly. Life on the farm settled into a quiet, pleasant routine. Every day, Otani rode Kentaro out to the Olympus construction site to check the progress. Everything was running smoothly, a testament to Carter's competence. Before they realized it, spring had arrived. The farm itself had always stayed green, thanks to the Bulbasaur's care, even through winter, while the landscape beyond still followed the seasons. Now, with spring in the air, the place felt alive in a new way. Otani woke each morning to clear, joyful birdsong and felt especially content. That morning, the Butterfree were up early. Above the sea of flowers, the males began their courtship dances, fluttering and wheeling as they tried to win the attention of their chosen partners. Watching them, Otani smiled. Spring had come, and everything was waking up. There was only one exception, the leader of the Butterfree. He hovered at the center of a whirl of color, dozens of females circling him and performing their elaborate courtship dance. He looked genuinely flustered. With so many suitors, which one could he possibly choose? Do you want them all? Otani joked to himself, completely missing the point. He didn't realize how serious Butterfree courtship really was. It's a once-a-year spectacle. Wild Butterfree gather for a massive migration, making cheerful calls as they travel long distances to their chosen breeding grounds. In the anime, Ash's Butterfree was famously swept away by a differently colored female during just such an event. The sight of hundreds of Butterfree in the sky, trailing long ribbons of color behind them, is unforgettable. The Butterfree on Otani's farm, however, were bred in captivity. They wouldn't join a migration. Would life on the farm ever be as peaceful or fulfilling for them as the open world, or would leaving for the wild be madness? Otani watched them dance with a pleased private smile. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, he slapped his forehead. He needed incubators, and fast. If he waited until the eggs were laid, he'd be scrambling to buy them at the last minute. Otani immediately called Oishi to ask if he could buy a large number of incubators. Oishi checked with the webmaster and got the go-ahead. Without hesitation, Otani offered, "I'll take 5,000 of the best ones." There was a stunned pause on the line. The top incubator is 20 Alliance coins each. Are you sure about that, Otani? Dashi asked. Otani, who'd been sipping water, nearly spat it out at the price. 20 coins? For each one? Forget it. Just give me the mid-range model, he choked. At that rate, 5,000 top-of-the-line incubators would have cost a small fortune, the same kind of money people spent on a supercube machine. Otani realized the premium models were a luxury he didn't need. Following Oishi's recommendation, Otani ended up ordering the mid-range incubators at 5 Alliance coins apiece. In practice, they worked the same way as the expensive ones when it came to protecting and nurturing elf eggs. Anything above that price was really aimed at wealthy buyers. Oishi warned that 5,000 units was still a large order and they'd be delivered the next day. Otani agreed. With that settled, he hung up. The day-to-day work on the farm would now be handled by Musashi and his team. Otani didn't have much to do now that the block production was finished. Musashi and his team were handling the coordination with the Silver Company, so Otani's presence wasn't required. He'd even set aside the business of the day and taken up a paintbrush for the first time in a long while, sitting on the grass and sketching every graceful pose of the Butterfree as they danced in the air. The next morning, Oishi arrived at the gate of Otani Farm right on schedule. He dropped off the incubator, exchanged a few hurried words, and left as quickly as he had come. The mating display from the day before had been overwhelmingly successful. Many Butterfree had paired up and reproduced. Even the leader had finally taken a mate, the most beautiful and strongest female among them. Butterfree are monogamous. They take a single partner for life and are fiercely loyal. With the incubator in hand, Otani went over to Caterpie's nest. A clutch of Pokémon eggs had already been laid and were starting to hatch. Pokémon reproduction isn't like human reproduction. Instead of gestating young internally, Pokémon often condense an egg containing their genetic material outside the body through a focused interaction of energy. It was fascinating to watch that process and then see the new hatchlings emerge. Most of the Butterfree had found mates, but a few unlucky individuals were still unpaired. They drifted close to the newly bonded couples, pestering them with clumsy, hopeful displays. It was a little sad but harmless, and in the grand scheme of things, nothing Otani needed to worry about. A few days after the eggs were laid, if the parents determine there's no hope for them, they'll move on and choose new mates. Reproduction was simply that important in their society. Otani worked methodically. One by one, he placed the elven eggs into the incubator, then carefully distributed the nutrient solution throughout each chamber. The solution supplied everything the eggs needed, helping the caterpillars inside to grow stronger and improving their chances and aptitudes when they hatched. When the incubator was all set, Otani went over a list of precautions with the parents, explaining handling, temperature, and feeding routines. He worked through them patiently, finishing only a little of the list by mid-morning. The newborn eggs were extremely fragile, and everything had to be done with the utmost care. Otani took his time. In the afternoon, he called Musashi in to help. She was nearly qualified as a Pokémon nurse. She'd almost passed the certification exam and had learned a lot on the job. The Chansey she'd been assigned during training lacked the sing ability and had poor aptitude, but Musashi never gave up on it. She'd formed a close bond with that Chansey despite the setbacks. Now, with Musashi's steady hands and experience, they were able to continue the delicate work together. Later, because Chansey couldn't sing well enough to pass the vocal exam, Musashi took the test in her place. She tried to perform, but the other Chansey's voices had a strange, hypnotic effect. Musashi nodded off and failed the exam. Musashi's mother, Miyamoto, had been a scientific researcher for Team Rocket and was close friends with Sakaki. She was also on good terms with Sakaki's mother. That closeness made Sakaki quietly fond of Musashi. When Musashi was 5, Miyamoto disappeared while chasing her dream. After she vanished, Musashi was placed with a very poor adoptive family. Sakaki couldn't raise her himself, so he watched over her from a distance. As a child, Musashi often went without enough to eat. To comfort herself, she would play at making delicious meals out of snow, pretending the cold shapes were real food. Despite the hardship, she grew up tough and optimistic. By chance, she later joined Team Rocket, where she met Kojiro and Meowth, both of whom had fled an arranged marriage at the Rocket Academy, and their adventures together began. Sakaki had put the three of them together for his own reasons. After graduation, he'd essentially put them on the sidelines, only light, peripheral duties, nothing heavy. Still, Musashi's talent showed through. She had a natural gift for coordination training. Without any formal coaching, she'd already won 5 ribbon medals and even placed 4th at the Sinnoh Grand Festival. She was also surprisingly skilled with the incubator, a practical ability he nursing school always emphasized. A fond smile crept over Musashi's face before she realized it. "You all need to grow up fast," she murmured. "Huh?" Otani didn't catch her. He was holding another Pokémon egg up to inspect it. "No, nothing, Mr. Otani." Musashi flushed, a little embarrassed, but forced herself to look composed. By the end of the day, they'd finished everything. From then on, Musashi's only real duty was to change the nutrient solution in the incubator on a regular schedule. Otani officially handed that responsibility to her. That afternoon, as a thank you for Musashi's hard work, Otani had made a tiramisu and presented it with a grin. Kojiro immediately reached to grab a slice, but Musashi was quicker. She pushed him gently away and claimed the dessert for herself. Meow Meow saw her chance. Kojiro had Musashi distracted, so she lunged in to make her move. Musashi, however, only needed a single smooth motion. One punch sent Meow Meow sprawling. Before Kojiro could react, Musashi landed the same effortless blow on him, and he went down too. With both opponents out of the way, Musashi grinned and settled down to savor the tiramisu. Meow Meow and Kojiro picked themselves up, their faces streaked with tears. After the last few days together, the two of them had worked out that Otani was all softness underneath his stern exterior. He was impossible to resist. Otani, who couldn't bear to see them like that, went off and came back with 2 other cakes for them. They weren't tiramisu, but that didn't matter. Meow Meow and Kojiro hugged the cakes like treasure and happily tucked in.